Hi guys. Tonight, we're diving headfirst into the icy grip of history's coldest chapters. Picture this. You're stepping onto a snow-covered path, the kind that crunches ominously under your boots, instantly sending a chilling dampness seeping into your footwear. The wind bites at your cheeks with a ferocious roar. Subconsciously, you realize this is the kind of environment where your phone battery would expire in a mere 3 minutes. But you don't have a phone, nor a heated jacket, not even a reliable weather forecast. You are in the boots of a medieval soldier, ordered to march through unforgiving winter mountains. And, to be brutally honest, your chances of survival are slim. Yet thousands undertook this perilous journey, and some, against all odds, made it through. Their stories, a blend of grit and sheer miracle, deserve careful consideration. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely appreciate the content. And while you're at it, please post your location and the local time in the comments. I always enjoy seeing the reach of this little virtual campfire. Now, dim the lights and join me as we step into the frozenpass. The air feels thinner than a sheet of paper, almost insubstantial. You pull your cloak's collar higher, though it offers little protection from the relentless wind. The line of soldiers stretches ahead, each back hunched, each figure seemingly battling against invisible icy fists. In the distance, a mule lets out a pitiful bray, a mournful cry from an animal acutely aware that its burden won't lessen. You look down and notice the trail littered with broken twigs, lost horseshoes, and the occasional discarded leather strap, testimony to the sacrifices made by those who couldn't bear the weight any longer. A stark historical reality emerges, a detail that often gets overlooked. Armies traversing mountain ranges in winter wasn't unusual. Charlemagne's forces marched through the Alps in 773 AD. Hannibal, long before him, accomplished the feat with elephants in tow. Later, the armies of the Holy Roman Empire attempted similar winter campaigns. Historical accounts frequently highlight the bravery displayed, but also hint at the sheer madness, acknowledging that survival, more often than the enemy, posed the biggest challenge each day. As your foot sinks into the snow crust, a peculiar detail comes to mind, one that still manages to bring a smile to your face despite the bitter cold. Some soldiers tucked tiny pieces of garlic or onion into their boots, convinced the smell alone warded off frostbite. Imagine the aroma emanating from an entire army of sweaty, freezing men with pungent garlic-infused toes. It's almost comical, and yet, in moments of desperation, even superstition can seem practical. The trail narrows, constricting the passage. You hear the wind hissing through the pine trees, bending their branches until they snap under the pressure. To your right, a cliff plunges into a mist so thick it feels like gazing into another dimension. The crunch of your boots echoes too loudly, so you fall into step, carefully placing your feet exactly where the soldier in front has placed his. Historians still debate whether these winter marches were meticulously planned strategies or reckless gambles fueled by ambition. Did commanders truly assess supply lines and calculate risks, or were they driven by pride and an urgent need for swift action, pushing their men into the heart of blizzards? This question remains unanswered because the sources, monastic chronicles or soldier diaries, tend to exaggerate. A monk might describe snow as chest-deep when, in reality, it only reached the knees. But then again, knee-deep snow for a week can certainly feel like chest-deep snow, can't it? You pause to catch your breath, listening intently. The sound of your own breath is amplified within the scarf wrapped around your mouth. The taste of wool and old sweat lingers on your tongue. Ahead, the commander raises his hand, halting the line. You stamp your feet to improve circulation, but each stamp sends up a puff of powder, like flour escaping from a baker's sack. The soldier beside you whispers something about saints protecting the faithful. You nod, not out of genuine belief, but because belief, even feigned, offers a measure of warmth, and you'll take any solace you can find. Night falls, torches flicker, their flames shrinking under the relentless gusts of wind. You huddle together in a small group, shoulders touching, body heat pooling like a precious, forbidden commodity. In the darkness, you hear a mule stumble, a curse uttered in an unfamiliar language, and the muffled thud of a pack tumbling down a slope into oblivion. Supplies lost forever. Snowflakes sting your eyelashes, causing a sharp discomfort. Your mind wanders, recalling summer fields, barley swaying gently in the breeze, the soothing hum of bees. Then, reality slams back with a blast of frigid air, carrying the faint scent of pine and ash. There's no summer here, only the relentless, grinding march forward, one step at a time, through the unforgiving frozen pass. The column begins to move again, torches weaving like orange stars along the ridge. You follow, too tired to question, too frozen to care. But you are still here, still walking. And the mountains, ancient and immutable, watch you in silent judgment. The ground beneath your feet feels like iron, unyielding and unforgiving. Each step sends a jolt up your shin, a jarring impact of bone against frozen earth. You press your heel down, hearing the faint crack of frost shattering under your leather soles. If you're fortunate enough to possess boots at all, they are stiff, patched with scraps of wool, perhaps even stuffed with straw in a desperate attempt to keep the cold from penetrating. Many in this line are less fortunate, trudging along in worn shoes or even barefoot, their toes slowly turning black as the days drag on. As you shuffle forward, you realize that footwear represents the first and most critical battleground. It's not glamorous. No gleaming swordplay or valiant charges, but a slow, grinding war between flesh and frost. In accounts of medieval campaigns, scribes describe soldiers removing their boots only to find their toes hardened like wax candles, claimed by frostbite before any enemy spear could reach them. This is the harsh, undeniable truth. Soldiers could lose battles before even engaging the enemy, defeated by their own frozen feet. And then there's another peculiar detail, a persistent camp rumor. Some men smeared animal fat inside their boots, believing the grease would create a barrier against the cold. The smell must have been nauseating, a rancid perfume of pig lard accompanying each step, but it may have worked, at least enough to preserve a few toes until the arrival of spring. The marching line continues its slow, steady progress. Snowflakes initially fall gently, then sting your eyes sideways as the wind picks up intensity. You tug at your bootlaces, tightening them, knowing that a loose knot could mean losing a boot, instantly swallowed by the white expanse of the trail. You've heard tales of entire shoes lost to the drifts, swallowed like coins in sand, never to be recovered. A mule brays again, its hooves scraping over a patch of frozen earth. The very road itself seems alive with hazards. Stones hidden beneath the snow, icy patches slick as glass. Every step is a gamble. Slip once, and the line won't stop for you. You imagine falling, tumbling down into the mist, your boots and body lost, becoming nothing more than another whispered rumor. Historians still debate whether medieval armies had standardized winter footwear or if improvisation reigned supreme. Some sources claim armies issued thicker boots lined with felt or wool, while others argue that most men simply wrapped whatever cloth they could find around their ankles. The truth is likely a complex mixture depending on factors like wealth, supply lines, and sheer luck. And, of course, commanders writing reports often omitted the mundane agony of sore feet in favor of more dramatic battle accounts. You stamp the ground, listening to the hollow echo around you. Men groan softly, their sounds muffled by scarves and hoods. The sound is rhythmic, almost a chant. Boots striking, crunching, sliding, repeating. In the quiet moments between gusts of wind, it becomes the march's soundtrack. Not drums, not horns, but the weary percussion of souls traversing frozen earth. The smell is unforgettable. Wool damp with sweat, leather cracking from the cold, and somewhere nearby, the faint, pungent aroma of horse dung frozen into icy lumps. It's strange how even filth can feel reassuring. It signifies that life still clings on, that the column hasn't yet been entirely claimed by the silence of the mountains. You attempt to distract yourself. Perhaps you think of home, of warm floors and the soft texture of rushes beneath your feet. Perhaps you wonder if this mountain path ever feels warm in summer, if green moss grows where you now stumble. But the thought vanishes as the wind slashes across your ankles. You pull your boot tighter, and the pain of returning circulation makes you gasp. The column comes to an abrupt halt. Men shuffle and murmur. Someone near the front kneels, helping a comrade to his feet. The sole of his boot has split open, flapping like a broken tongue. The soldier attempts a laugh, but his voice breaks into a cough. He ties the sole back together with rope, each knot a silent prayer that it will hold for at least one more day. In that moment, you understand that boots are more than just footwear. They are the thin shield between soldier and oblivion. The world may admire banners and swords, but here in the mountains, survival begins and ends with leather wrapped around your toes. You stamp your feet again, feeling the cold gnawing up your leg. Ahead, the line moves, a shuffling procession of exhausted feet. Each step is a battle, each crunch against the frozen earth a stark reminder that sometimes the hardest enemy is simply the ground you stand on. You pull a chunk of bread from your satchel, anticipating relief. But the moment your teeth meet the bread, you feel a shock. It doesn't bend, doesn't soften, doesn't break apart in the expected way. Instead, it crunches like stone. The loaf you've carried since yesterday has hardened into a weapon, hard enough to bruise a knuckle, useless as food until coaxed with fire or steam. You chew anyway, risking cracked teeth because hunger is stronger than comfort. This isn't an exaggeration. Chroniclers of the Crusades and Alpine campaigns alike wrote of rations transforming into frozen bricks, bread, salted meat, beans. Every item meant to sustain an army stiffening into inedible lumps once temperatures plummeted. That's the harsh reality. Soldiers expended as much energy trying to soften their food as they did consuming it. Soaking bread in water, holding meat close to their bodies for warmth, even crumbling biscuits into boiling snow. Every trick mattered. And then there's another peculiar detail preserved in some soldier letters. Men reportedly placed small loaves under their armpits as they marched, hoping body heat would soften them enough to chew. Imagine the absurd sight. An entire line of grim warriors clutching bread to their sides like secret pets, smelling faintly of yeast and sweat. Not exactly glorious, but hunger rarely leaves room for dignity. The column moves slowly, and you continue gnawing at the bread. The bread resists, its grains sharp against your tongue. You close your eyes and imagine fresh loaves from home, warm crust steaming, the comforting crackle of ovens. But when you open them again, you see only snow stretching ahead and faces strained against hunger. Historians still debate whether supply officers truly anticipated the severity of the mountain cold. Some argue that planners underestimated the freezing point of basic rations, assuming salted food would withstand frost. Others claim commanders knew the risks and simply gambled that their men could endure. The truth likely lies in that murky area where poor logistics and blind ambition intersect. Either way, the outcome was the same. Brittle bread, shivering soldiers, and morale plummeting with each unyielding bite. A soldier beside you mutters curses at his ration. He smashes it with the hilt of his knife, shattering the crumbs onto the snow. He scoops some into his mouth, the rest lost to the wind. The bitterness on his face isn't just hunger. It's despair, the quiet realization that the very tools of survival are turning against him. Your own stomach twists, feeling the gnawing emptiness spread like a cold fire. In the distance, smoke rises. Campfires being coaxed to life by men desperate to boil snow, soften beans, and create a broth that at least feels edible. The smell of faint smoke is both cruel and comforting, promising warmth while reminding you of the distance still to be marched. Your teeth ache from the effort. You tuck the remaining bread back into your satchel. Perhaps by nightfall, with enough body heat and patience, it will yield. Until then, you march, your belly echoing with hollow growls, your mind wandering to feasts that never were. The crunch of snow under your boots is now matched by the crunch of bread in your mouth. Both feel endless, both feel like punishment. But you keep chewing because the alternative is far worse. In this frozen pass, even food becomes stone, and you must find a way to eat it or join the silence buried beneath the snow. The wind has become sly, curling around your hood and slipping icy fingers down your neck. Your stomach aches with the memory of that stone-hard bread, and you find yourself staring at the simple, white expanse all around. Snow is everywhere. Underfoot, piled on ledges, clinging to tree branches like stubborn wool. It is both curse and salvation, because when food runs out, snow is the only broth left. You crouch near a campfire where men huddle close, hands outstretched like wilted flowers. Someone has placed a dented pot above the flames. Inside, handfuls of snow hiss and melt into water, steam curling upward, as if reluctant to leave. The result is a thin, tasteless soup, barely more than melted snow with a scrap of vegetable or dried meat floating within. Yet it's hot, and in these mountains, hot liquid is as close to hope as you'll get. That's the simple, undeniable truth. Armies on the march often relied on snowmelt for cooking and drinking. Chroniclers described nights when water sources froze solid, forcing soldiers to gather snow by the armful. Fires burned low, not always because wood was scarce, though it often was, but because green logs smoked more than they flamed, struggling against the damp air. Meals were more ritual than nourishment, an act of convincing the body it had eaten. And here's a quirky detail to amuse you in the gloom. Soldiers sometimes tossed in bits of leather, shaved from old belts or saddle straps, to add substance to their soup. The boiling softened the leather into something resembling noodles. Did it taste good? Probably not. But when hunger gnaws louder than the wind, you'll chew anything that yields. The crackle of the fire is soothing, although the smoke stings your eyes. The pot tilts precariously, and you watch one soldier stir with a stick, careful not to spill the precious liquid. The smell is faintly earthy, like boiled bark. You hold out your wooden cup, hands trembling from both cold and impatience, and finally take a sip. The liquid scalds your tongue, but warms your chest. For a brief moment, the ache inside you quiets. Scholars still debate how often armies carried proper cooking supplies during winter campaigns. Some argue that commanders prioritized cauldrons and pots, essential for morale and survival. Others claim soldiers improvised with helmets, shields, or even hollowed stones. Evidence is fragmented, and the truth may lie scattered like the embers that flicker in this camp, each glowing briefly before fading into the dark. Around you, voices murmur. Men joke weakly about the soup, calling it snow stew or white broth. A laugh ripples through the group, thin but genuine, proving that even mockery can taste better than despair. The sound is joined by the whinny of horses nearby, their breath fogging like smoke in the firelight. The night grows heavier. You lean closer to the fire, hands cupped around the cup, steam dampening your lashes. You realize this meager ritual, transforming snow into soup, is more than just food. It is an act of defiance. The mountains may take warmth, comfort, and sleep, but they will not take the will to eat, however meager the meal. As the flames shrink, you sip the last of your broth, licking the rim of the cup for stray drops. Tomorrow, the snow will still be here. Tomorrow, you'll gather more, boil more, and sip again. One cup at a time, you'll coax survival from the frozen silence. You awaken to the sound of fabric snapping in the wind, the canvas of tents strained like sails on a stormy sea. Cold needles your skin before you've even risen. Instinctively, you pull your cloak tighter, trying to bury your chin in something resembling warmth. Yet the layers are never enough. Wool scratches against your neck. Linen wraps cling damply to your chest. And still, the wind slips through every seam like a thief. Medieval soldiers survived in bundles. The undeniable fact is that armies layered wool, linen, and any scraps of fur they could find, transforming themselves into walking bundles of cloth. Cloaks served double duty as bedding at night, and mittens were rare enough that men pulled their sleeves over their hands instead. Monks and knights alike recorded the misery of never feeling quite dry, as snow melted against fabric only to refreeze as stiff plates of ice. Then there are the charms, the odd little details tucked between layers of cloth. A peculiar detail comes from travelers' accounts. Men sometimes pinned bits of parchment inscribed with saintly prayers directly to their tunics, convinced that divine words offered better protection than wool. Others knotted red strings around their wrists, a folk belief that the color itself warded off frostbite. Superstition layered alongside fabric. Faith served as insulation. You shift, feeling the seams of your tunic rub against frozen skin. Each layer holds its own smell, The oily tang of lanolin from sheep's wool, the faint mildew of linen worn too long without drying, the smoky perfume of last night's campfire. When men huddle together in tents, the combined scent becomes thick enough to taste. A sour, human cloud that strangely reassures you of survival. Historians continue to dispute how standardized winter gear really was. Some chronicles suggest commanders issued fur-lined cloaks, boots, and gloves in bulk for major campaigns. Others argue this was more fantasy than fact, pointing out that wealthier knights might have enjoyed luxuries. But common foot soldiers relied on patched, borrowed, or stolen garments. The debate remains, stitched together like the very layers soldiers wore. Uneven, full of gaps, yet somehow holding shape. As the march resumes, you notice the ritual gestures. Men tug cloaks around their throats, whisper a prayer, adjust a belt to keep fabric closer to the skin. Someone near you sneezes into the fold of his sleeve, then pulls it back over his numb fingers without hesitation. Every layer matters. Every scrap is precious. The wind whips harder, snow dusting your shoulders, clinging in little pearls that melt, soak in, and instantly refreeze. You feel like a walking icicle, yet you press on, each step cushioned by the bulk of your clothing. Without it, you know you'd last minutes, maybe less. Somewhere behind you, a man mutters a prayer to Saint Martin, patron saint of soldiers, who once cut his cloak in half to share with a beggar. The story floats through the line like smoke, a reminder that even a ragged half-cloak is still worth saving a life. You pull your own cloak closer, fingering the edge where threads unravel. It feels fragile, insufficient. But in these mountains, faith and wool are all that stand between you and silence. The march is no longer just on your legs. It weighs on your back, on your shoulders, on the thin rope of patience stretched within you. You hear the scraping sound before you see it. Sledges dragging over snow and ice, pulled by animals whose breaths steam like small bonfires in the thin air. You turn your head and catch sight of them. Donkeys with ears pinned back, oxen with frost clinging to their muzzles, and mules staggering under loads that seem heavier than the mountains themselves. The stark reality is brutally simple. Medieval armies depended on pack animals and crude sledges to haul supplies when wheels were useless. Mountain passes made wagons nearly impossible, so armies lashed gear onto wooden runners and urged beasts forward through the drifts. Without them, there would be no bread, no arrows, no firewood, no hope of continuing. Entire campaigns lived or died by the stubborn endurance of creatures that had never volunteered for war. You watch one mule strain against its harness, hooves slipping as it drags a wooden sledge piled high with sacks. The noise is terrible. The groan of ropes, the squeal of wood scraping ice, the guttural protest of the animal. Soldiers shove from behind, grunting in rhythm, their breaths forming little clouds that vanish instantly. The scene is slow, almost endless. Push, slip, curse, push again. And yet, amid the hardship, odd little stories surface. A quirky detail whispers through chronicles. Soldiers sometimes whispered charms into the ears of their beasts, convinced that kind words or holy phrases would give them strength. Others, less gentle, swore that singing bawdy songs in the animal's presence made them walk faster, as if the laughter of men infected the mules with stubborn cheer. You can almost imagine the absurdity. An army crawling up a mountain while soldiers belt out crude verses trying to coax a donkey forward through the snow. The slope steepens. Men tie ropes to the sledges, hauling alongside the animals, their boots scraping against the ice. You catch the acrid scent of sweat mixing with the cold, a sharp, almost metallic odor. A strap snaps, and the load tumbles sideways, spilling grain onto the snow. The kernels scatter like golden stars against the white. Men dive to scoop them up, ignoring the frost, biting their bare fingers, because every handful counts. You see one soldier lick his palm to collect stray grains, greedily sucking them down before they're lost. The road narrows and panic flickers in the group. The path hugs a cliff, barely wide enough for a man and a mule together. One misstep, and the load and perhaps the animal will plunge into the abyss below. You hear men shouting, ropes creaking as they hold the sledge steady. The mule freezes, eyes wide, nostrils flaring. His terror is contagious. You feel your own chest tighten, your feet rooted, as though you too might be dragged over the edge. Historians still grapple with whether commanders truly calculated the risks of dragging supplies this way or whether desperation dictated every choice. Some argue that leaders planned carefully, mapping routes and establishing supply depots in advance. Others suggest they simply gambled, trusting that enough animals would survive to carry what was needed. Sources are contradictory. Monks writing from monasteries far away could hardly know the daily struggle on these passes. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. A plan on parchment, shattered daily by wind and snow. The mule finally lurches forward, steadied by soldiers pulling on ropes like a human team of reins. The sledge groans past the narrowest point, and a sigh of relief ripples through the line. You breathe again, unaware you had been holding your breath. For a moment, you consider how many lives depend on each stubborn hoof, each creaking board of wood. The sun, weak and pale, breaks through the clouds, illuminating the scene with a ghostly glow. You see steam rising off the animals' backs, their coats frosted white, their eyes dull, but still moving forward. You wonder how many will collapse tonight. Some will be eaten, you know this grim fact from countless campaigns. Desperate soldiers butcher their beasts when supplies run out, trading transport for meat. The bones are left in the snow, mute witnesses to hunger's reign. But for now, the column pushes on. The soundscape is relentless. Hooves striking ice, sledges screeching, men grunting, ropes creaking, curses flying. You smell dung, sharp and acrid, oddly reassuring in the sterile cold. It means life still clings, however miserably, to this frozen passage. The trail levels briefly, and a strange quiet falls. Men slump against their sledges, patting their animals as if they were comrades. One soldier pulls a carrot from his pocket, perhaps stolen, perhaps saved, and offers it to a mule. The animal's lips tremble, teeth crunching down gratefully. You witness this small act of kindness, a brief respite in the midst of immense hardship. A realization dawns. Survival here isn't solely about human endurance. It's about the animals as well, unwilling participants in a war they never chose. Their tenacious spirits, their steady gait, their tireless pulling. These are what make the arduous journey possible. Without them, the army would be nothing more than starving men with empty hands. You tighten your own pack straps, suddenly acutely aware of their weight. Your boots crunch forward, their rhythm echoing the steady beat of the mule beside you. Man and beast, bound not just by ropes but by the shared necessity of progress, trudge through the snow together. Step by frozen step, the mountains rise even higher, the sledges dragging behind like anchors. You wonder how many more ridges lie ahead, how many more animals will falter before the army reaches its destination. But for now, the column moves, and that's all that matters. The mountain offers a deceptive act of clemency in winter. Rivers, swollen and untamed in summer, freeze into hard, glittering pathways. You find yourselves facing one such river now, its surface as smooth as glass, stretching into the distance like a mirror laid across the land. The army hesitates at the riverbank, each man gazing at the sheet of ice, questioning whether it will support the weight of thousands or shatter into a deadly torrent. Accounts from that era describe these crossings with a mixture of awe and terror. Chronicles of Alpine campaigns reveal that entire columns traversed frozen rivers when bridges were destroyed or non-existent. To walk on that ice was both salvation and a gamble. No mud-stuck wagons, no raging waters to sweep men away, but instead a treacherous expanse groaning under each step. And then, one of those peculiar details that remain etched in memory. Soldiers sometimes spread hay or straw over the ice, believing it would improve traction under their boots and sledges. Imagine the absurdity. An army carpeting a river like a banquet hall, shuffling across a makeshift golden path that crackled and shifted beneath them. Horses were blindfolded to calm them, their ears twitching nervously as their hooves clattered against the frozen surface. You shuffle forward in the line, your breath clouding the air, your ears filled with the strange music of the ice. Cracks, pops, and groans like a living creature beneath your feet. Each sound makes your heart leap. You focus intently on the soldier ahead, mirroring his movements precisely, unwilling to tempt fate with a misstep. The ice glistens in patches where the snow has blown away, revealing depths so dark they seem bottomless. Modern historians disagree on the safety of these crossings. Some argue that commanders carefully chose nights when temperatures had been brutally low for weeks, ensuring the ice's strength. Others suggest it was largely luck, that desperation drove men onto the rivers regardless of the ice's thickness, and that prayers were more significant than measurements. The historical records offer no certainty, only fragmented descriptions and the occasional tragic account of lives lost to the cracking ice. A cart lurches onto the river, its wheels wrapped in rawhide for better grip. The sledge runners screech, sparks flying where metal meets frozen stone at the riverbank. Once on the ice, the entire load glides too easily, skidding sideways as men struggle with ropes to maintain its course. The mule pulling it stumbles, its hooves slipping, its eyes wide with fear. A soldier rushes forward, whispering soothing words, guiding each step as if calming a frightened child. The animal trembles violently, yet somehow keeps moving. Your own boot slip sending a jolt up your leg. You instinctively spread your arms, regaining your balance at the last moment. The taste of fear floods your mouth, metallic and sharp, as if you've bitten your tongue. The silence is heavy, punctuated only by the unsettling creaks beneath your feet. Even the wind seems to hold its breath, unwilling to disturb the precarious gamble. Halfway across, you look up and see the line stretching endlessly before and behind you. Tiny figures move in solemn procession, each step a testament to their trust in the frozen surface. Torches flicker at the riverbanks, their glow obscured by mist, as if the world itself is holding its breath. Then, suddenly, a cracking sound, a sharp report like a musket shot echoing across the valley. Men freeze, animals bray, ropes strain taut. For a heart-stopping moment, you feel the ice give way beneath you. Panic grips your chest. But the break is small, to the side, a warning, not a death sentence. The column moves again, more slowly now, each man lighter on his feet, each prayer uttered more fervently. Finally, the far bank rises before you. Men stumble onto solid ground, some kissing the earth, others collapsing from exhaustion. You follow, your boots thudding onto frozen earth, your legs trembling from more than just the cold. Behind you, the river gleams in the moonlight, a silver scar across the mountains. It has spared you this time, though you know others haven't been so fortunate. You glance back once more, the sound of creaking still ringing in your ears. It feels less like crossing a river and more like walking across the back of some ancient beast, holding its breath beneath the ice. You awaken before dawn, when the world is hushed and white, and realize the silence isn't empty at all. It's filled with smoke. Thin trails rise from dozens of campfires, weaving into the sky like ghostly banners. You can taste the soot before you smell it, acrid and dry in your throat. The army has survived another night, and those slender columns of smoke are the proof. Chroniclers frequently noted this nightly ritual. Fires provided warmth, nourishment, and a chance for the body to relax from the cold. Soldiers huddled in circles, their faces illuminated orange against the snow, the rest of the world a dark blur. For an army crossing mountains, these pockets of firelight were more than just comfort. They were essential for survival. Without heat, fingers stiffened, lungs froze, and sleep became a fatal risk. Then there are the unusual details preserved in letters and stories. One peculiar practice involved placing heated stones in the fire, wrapping them in cloth, and using them as bed warmers. Others swore by sleeping as close to the embers as possible, despite waking with singed cloaks and coughing from the smoke. Imagine dozing off, your nose filled with the smell of burnt wool, yet grateful for the feeling of warmth in your toes. You move closer to one of the fires. The flames crackle hungrily, sparks flying into the darkness like tiny meteors. The wood smokes more than it burns. Green branches snapped from the sparse trees above the treeline. The smoke stings your eyes, and you blink, feeling tears freeze on your lashes. Around you, men are half asleep, their heads nodding, their hands outstretched stiffly toward the glow. The sounds are muted, the popping of fire, quiet breathing, the faint rustle of cloth as someone shifts for warmth. Scholarly opinion remains divided on how armies managed firewood in regions stripped bare by snow. Some argue that commanders organized collection parties, sending men ahead to gather fuel. Others believe that most armies simply burned whatever they could find, even tearing down wooden shrines or village fences. The evidence is scant, but every account agrees on one thing. Without fire, morale collapsed faster than the temperature. You cup your hands, feeling the warmth seep into your bones. A creeping relief that almost makes you sigh. Your cloak now smells of smoke, the scent permeating the fabric until it becomes a part of you. It will linger long after the march is over, a reminder of nights when smoke was as precious as bread. Nearby, a group begins to hum softly. Not a song, exactly, but a low drone that matches the rhythm of the flames. It's not for entertainment. It's for endurance. The sound prevents eyelids from drooping too far, keeping men from slipping into a sleep that might never end. The hum and the fire together create a fragile barrier against the mountain's silence. Then suddenly the wind shifts. Smoke billows into your face, choking you, burning your eyes and throat. You cough, doubling over, the world a blur of white and gray. For a moment it feels like drowning on dry land. The man beside you laughs hoarsely, muttering that the smoke has chosen you as its victim tonight. Even here, humor creeps in like another kind of warmth, stubborn and human. When dawn finally breaks, the smoke lingers as a veil across the valley, curling above the camp, marking the army's passage for miles around. Enemy scouts could undoubtedly see it, but the risk is accepted. It's better to live another day in the warmth of fire than to freeze invisibly in the dark. As the camp stirs and the fires are extinguished, you take one last deep breath of smoke. It clings to you, harsh yet strangely comforting. The memory of this night will remain not in sights or sounds, but in smell, the bitter perfume of wood, wool, and survival. The road climbs uphill again, and exhaustion spreads through the column like a slow disease. Faces are pale, lips cracked, bodies stooped beneath cloaks, stiff with frost. Then, almost without warning, a sound begins. Low at first, a murmur on the wind, then swelling into a rhythmic chant. Soldiers are singing. Writers of the time frequently recorded this habit. Armies marching through difficult terrain maintained cadence with chants or songs. It wasn't about melody or beauty. It was about survival. The rhythm gave weary feet a reason to keep moving one step, then the next. Words repeated endlessly could drown out hunger, cold, even fear. Think of it as the medieval equivalent of blasting music at the gym. Except here, the gym is a snow-covered cliff, and a misstep could mean death. There's also the peculiar twist of human creativity under duress. Some accounts mention verses improvised on the march, where men mocked their commanders or joked about the absurdity of freezing to death in someone else's war. Imagine trudging through the snow while belting out a parody of a church hymn, replacing sacred lines with crude humor that makes the entire column laugh. That odd, half-rebellious chorus might have been the only form of rebellion safe enough to express. The sound builds around you now, echoing between the ridges. The snow muffles most noises, but the singing rises above it, bouncing strangely in the still air. You can hear the scrape of boots keeping time, the clatter of a pot dangling from someone's pack striking rhythmically. The tune is uneven, sometimes breaking into coughs, but it persists. For a few minutes, you forget your numb toes because the sound lifts you. Scholars aren't entirely in agreement on whether commanders encouraged this practice or tolerated it reluctantly. Some argue that singing was essential for maintaining order, keeping the lines moving together, men united in breath and beat. Others suspect that officers disapproved of the irreverent lyrics but turned a blind eye, knowing that silence was more dangerous than mockery. The truth, as usual, is blurred between regulation and reality. Your own voice joins in almost unconsciously. The words are simple, a repeated phrase about reaching the valley, about warmth and wine waiting ahead. The melody is flat, but it feels good to give your breath shape instead of just clouds of vapor. The volume swells until the entire column sounds like a single beast roaring against the cold. And then comes the strangest part. You realize the singing isn't just for you. Animals perk their ears at the noise, moving more steadily as if reassured by the human chorus. Even the mountains seem to respond. The rhythm pushes back the silence, filling the empty air with something alive. You notice a grin spreading across the face of the soldier beside you. His teeth are yellow, his cheeks cracked by the wind, yet the smile seems genuine. He stamps his boots in time, swinging his arms wide, daring the snow to weigh him down. For a brief stretch of road, laughter intertwines with the chant, and the column almost feels like a parade rather than a death march. The path twists again, and the song falters. Breath shortens, verses dissolve into gasps. But the echo lingers, floating back down the valley like a memory. You realize the music has done its work. Men have walked another mile without noticing the pain. Tomorrow, the singing may rise again. Different words, perhaps darker jokes, perhaps holier tones. But tonight, you carry in your ears the echo of stubborn voices defying the cold. The snow crunches back into silence, but inside your chest, the rhythm continues, each step still keeping time with the invisible drumbeat of survival. You expect a mug of ale to taste like comfort, like fire sliding down your throat, bolstering your courage. But here in the mountains, even liquid hope betrays you. The casks freeze, the froth stiffens into slush. What pours into your cup is no longer a drink, but a half-frozen lump, more porridge than beer. Medieval records leave no doubt that alcohol accompanied armies. It was safer than water and provided calories along with morale. Beer and ale for common soldiers, wine for officers and wealthier knights, sometimes if luck and supplies allowed. In warmer climates, the cask was a companion. In alpine passes, however, the cold turned it into a mockery. Men hammered at barrels with axes, trying to break through the ice, scooping out handfuls of slush to hold against their tongues. And there are those small, eccentric details that linger. Some soldiers wrote about heating ale by dropping hot stones into their mugs. The result, apparently, was a bubbling, smoky brew that smelled halfway between bread and burnt wood. Imagine huddling by a campfire, sipping something that tasted like liquid chimney soot, but still grateful because it was warm. You cradle your own cup now, shaking it gently. The ale inside is thick like half-set syrup. You take a sip, and the cold shock against your teeth makes you wince. The taste is faint, dulled by freezing, but the memory of it is enough. Around you, men lift their cups too, toasting half-heartedly. The clinking is muffled, more wood on wood than bright metal, but the gesture is significant. The question of just how much armies relied on alcohol remains unsettled among scholars. Some argue that drink was essential, issued daily in measured rations, a lifeline for both morale and health. Others counter that supplies were too inconsistent, that soldiers often went without, relying instead on melted snow or thin broths. The truth likely varied by campaign, by wealth, by chance. Sometimes barrels rolled along faithfully. Other times, they froze solid or tumbled into ravines, leaving only dry mouths and longing. You glance at the men beside you, their cheeks pink, not from warmth, but from the brief effects of the drink. Laughter drifts upward, softer than the snowflakes falling on cloaks. One man tells a joke about a bishop slipping on ice. Another sings a line from a tavern song, his voice slurred but defiant. For a moment, the column feels less like a march and more like a tavern with white walls and a ceiling of storm clouds. But the reprieve is short. The wind cuts in, silencing the laughter. Your ale turns to slush again before the cup is half empty. You swallow what remains, your teeth aching from the cold. The taste lingers, bitter and flat, but so does the comfort, the faint reminder of hearths and feasts, of lives far from this mountain road. The fire dwindles, men curl under cloaks, and the casks sit stiff with frost. You know tomorrow they will be heavier, harder to pry open, but still carried along. Because even frozen, ale is hope in a barrel, and hope is not something you abandon on the side of a mountain. The night deepens. You lie back, cup still in hand, the faint taste of slush on your tongue. The silence returns, broken only by the sound of breath and the occasional sleepy chuckle. For tonight, ale, half frozen, half liquid, has done its work. The snow falls harder now, thick curtains that swallow distance and blur the line between sky and earth. You march with your head bowed low, eyes squinting, when suddenly a sound cuts through the storm. A deep, resonant blast that vibrates in your chest more than your ears. A horn. Medieval armies relied on sound as their lifeline in weather like this. Contemporary descriptions mention trumpets, horns, even drums used as signals when sight was useless. In blizzards, where banners vanished into white fog and shouting carried only a few feet before being swallowed by the wind, the long, mournful note of a horn was often the only command soldiers could follow. It meant move forward, regroup, or brace for trouble. Without it, men scattered and froze alone in the snow. And then there's the curious image left by one account of a Swiss campaign. Some horns were so crudely carved from ox horn or wood that they froze to the lips of the players. Imagine a soldier yanking the instrument away, only to rip skin from his mouth, the blood freezing instantly, and still being expected to blow again at the commander's signal. A grim joke among the ranks was that a hornblower left pieces of himself behind with every call. The storm swallows almost everything else. Your boots crunch, your breath rasps, but all around you is a wall of white silence. The horn sounds again, closer now, and men shuffle toward it instinctively, like moths drawn to a flame. You raise your head, scanning for a banner, but nothing moves above the snow. Only the note guides you, hollow and commanding, telling you where the column turns. Scholars remain divided about how effective these sound signals really were in mountain storms. Some argue they were indispensable, noting repeated mentions in chronicles of horns rallying men in chaos. Others suggest that the sound often confused more than it helped, echoing strangely against cliffs, leading soldiers to march in the wrong direction. The evidence leaves no certainty, just glimpses of confusion described in the shaky ink of exhausted scribes. The blast comes again, this time long and low. You feel it vibrate in your chest, steadying your steps. The man beside you cups his hand around his ear, straining to hear its direction. Another mutters a prayer to Saint Cecilia, patron saint of music, as if even divine harmony might guide him straight. You imagine the hornblower himself, hunched against the gale, cheeks puffed out, fingers frozen to the wood. Each note must feel like lifting a mountain, but without him, the army would scatter like snowflakes on the wind. And then, faint but real, you hear a second sound. A replying horn somewhere ahead, echoing through the pass, a call and response, weaving a line of sound through the storm, binding the army together by invisible threads of breath. The march continues. You follow the sound, step after step, until your legs ache and your ears ring. The horn is not music, not beauty, but in this endless white silence, it is the closest thing to a life-sustaining heartbeat. And tonight that is enough. The storm eases, but a new menace creeps in with the dawn. The glare. The world has turned blindingly white, every surface reflecting the pale sun until it feels as though knives of light are stabbing your eyes. You blink hard, tears freezing on your lashes, and realize you can't keep your eyes open for long without pain. Snow blindness, an invisible enemy that strikes without weapon or roar. Records from that time emphasized this danger. Chroniclers noted that soldiers complained of aching eyes, blurred vision, and sometimes complete, temporary blindness after days of marching across bright snowfields. It wasn't permanent for most, but in a winter campaign, even losing sight for hours could mean stumbling off a cliff or being left behind. Commanders dreaded this affliction as much as frostbite, because an army without sight is an army that cannot march. And then there's the strange ingenuity men employed. One unusual trick appears in a few scattered accounts, rubbing charcoal or soot around the eyes to dull the glare. It must have looked bizarre. Lines of weary soldiers with black streaks smeared across their faces like war paint, not for battle, but simply to keep walking without going blind. Others are said to have cut narrow slits into strips of leather, the crude ancestors of snow goggles, reducing the light to manageable slivers. You reach up and smear a thumb against the side of the campfire pit, lifting a streak of soot to rub along your cheekbones. The grit scratches against your skin, but the relief is immediate. You can open your eyes wider. The world is no longer a blinding wall of light. Others do the same, their faces turning into smudged masks that make the column look more like a troop of shadows than an army. Modern researchers disagree on how widespread these protective measures were. Some argue they were common folk remedies passed down by local guides or shepherds who knew the mountains. Others believe they were rare improvisations, not often mentioned because most soldiers simply suffered without remedy. The truth remains uncertain, hidden like footprints erased by fresh snow. The march continues, but at least now you can see. The ice sparkles less cruelly. The path ahead takes clearer shape. You notice details you had missed before, the jagged cracks in the frozen earth, the faint blue shimmer of distant glaciers, the shadow of ravens circling overhead. Even in hardship, the world has moments of fragile beauty, glimpsed only once the pain is eased. A soldier beside you jokes weakly that, with soot-smeared eyes, you all look like demons marching out of the mountain. Another replies that demons would be warmer. Laughter ripples briefly, blackened faces grinning in the glare. For a few heartbeats, the misery softens into something lighter. Still, the sun climbs higher, and the brightness doesn't relent. You squint through your soot-streaked mask, boots crunching forward, grateful for this small trick of survival. Without it, the mountain would blind you. With it, you can at least keep moving, eyes open to the endless white road ahead. The valley sleeps under its blanket of snow, but the silence is fragile. You march with the column, boots squeaking against hard-packed drifts, when the ground trembles beneath your feet. At first, it feels like nothing more than your own exhaustion. A misstep, a skipped heartbeat, but then the mountain itself groans. A deep, rolling sound swells through the air, and instinctively, every soldier freezes. The air tastes suddenly sharp, filled with the metallic tang of panic. You look upward. The slope above, heavy with snow, is shifting. Avalanches were the nightmare no commander could control. Period accounts leave us haunting glimpses of entire detachments swallowed by a single roar of snow. Not enemy arrows, not starvation, just the mountain, shaking loose its burden and burying men as if erasing ink from a page. Armies feared avalanches as much as they feared ambushes because neither warning nor skill could guarantee survival. One moment you march, the next you are gone, smothered in silence. And then there are the strange little stories soldiers passed along. Some believed whistling could trigger a slide, so men kept their lips sealed tight even when their nerves begged for a tune. Others carried tiny bells, not to ring, but to silence the superstitious. The idea was that ringing bells would calm the enraged mountains, as if snow could be soothed like an angry spirit. Picture an army marching forward, bells tucked into their cloaks, a charm against nature's fury. Strange, yet when survival hinges on superstition, even absurd rituals seem rational. The crack above deepens, a tearing sound like cloth ripped apart by unseen hands. Then it begins. The snow loosens, starting as a whisper, then a rush, then an unstoppable wall. White fury crashes down the slope, engulfing trees and boulders in its relentless path. The ground trembles. The air whips into a frenzy. The roar is deafening, drowning out even your own pulse. Men scatter instinctively, seeking the meager protection of rocks, pressing themselves flat against the frozen ground as if that alone could save them. Historians continue to debate the frequency of avalanches impacting medieval armies. Some chronicles vividly depict them, claiming entire campaigns were shattered by single events. Others remain silent on the topic, leaving modern readers to speculate whether the scribes exaggerated or perhaps omitted these stories to protect reputations. The sources are fragmented and inconsistent, leaving us with more questions than answers. Did avalanches annihilate entire regiments? Or were they rare tragedies amplified by rumor and exaggeration? We may never know for certain. You throw yourself behind a jagged boulder, the snow stinging your cheek. The roar intensifies, then thunders past, a white river flowing where moments ago there had been stillness. The sheer force of the wind slams into you, knocking the air from your lungs. When it finally subsides, The silence that follows is even more terrifying than the noise. You lift your head, your ears ringing. The slope where the column had been marching is now blank, smooth, a pristine expanse of white, completely erased. Shouts ripple through the survivors. Men claw at the snow with bare hands, frantically digging, screaming names that are swallowed by the unforgiving mountain. Fingers bleed, nails crack, but the snow remains merciless, as hard as stone beneath the surface. Occasionally, a fragment of a cloak emerges, a frozen arm, a twisted sledge. Some men are pulled out alive, gasping and half-blind, while others are never found. The cold claims them faster than their comrades can dig. You sit back on your heels, panting, staring at the unbroken white expanse that has become a graveyard. The air smells sharply of pine splintered by the avalanche, a pungent, raw odor. Your body trembles not only from the cold, but from the chilling realization that nothing, not skill, not courage, not faith, can protect you from the capricious whim of an avalanche. The mountain decides and men obey. Yet the march must continue. The commander raises his arm, his voice carrying the order to proceed along a safer ridge. Soldiers glance back once, twice, then trudge onward, leaving their buried comrades behind. You feel the weight of guilt like a stone in your gut, but also the strange numbness that survival demands. To stop is to freeze, and so you walk, step after step, as the snow silently conceals its dead. That night, the camp is unusually quiet. The fires burn low. Men huddle together, wordless, each staring into the flames, as if searching for lost faces reflected in the flickering light. The smell of smoke is heavy, clinging to cloaks and hair. But even this meager comfort cannot erase the memory of the roar. Somewhere in the distance, another avalanche rumbles. A faint but undeniable sound. Heads lift, shoulders tense, then slump again. The mountain reminds them it is still watching, still listening. And yet, even here, small rituals persist. A soldier nearby mutters a charm under his breath, pressing a bone talisman between his palms. Another ties a scrap of red cloth to a branch, planting it in the snow like a defiant flag against disaster. You realize the avalanche has not only stolen lives, it has etched superstition even deeper into the hearts of every survivor. The next morning, as the column resumes its march, the path is eerily smooth. Where men died, the snow gleams unbroken, as if mocking their memory. You place your boots carefully, each step a whispered prayer that the ground will hold. Above, the peaks loom, silent and indifferent, their white shoulders heavy with the potential for more devastation. You understand now why medieval soldiers viewed mountains as places of spirits, of divine judgment, of wrath cloaked in white. Your breath clouds before you, mingling with the mist rising from the slopes. Somewhere behind, buried beneath yards of snow, lie comrades, mules and supplies, swallowed whole by the mountain's fury. Ahead, the path stretches on, uncertain and perilous. You march because there is no other choice. The mountain takes its toll, and the living keep moving forward. The march resumes in grim silence, boots crunching on the fresh snow that hides yesterday's horror. But soon you notice something chilling, not in the wind, but in what lies at the side of the path. A shape half buried, dark against the white. You look closer and realize it's a body, frozen stiff, its arms curled as if still clutching a weapon. Its face is pale as stone, its mouth open in a scream that will never end. He has become a marker, a grim warning for all who follow. Accounts from that era don't shy away from such details. Monastic chronicles, travel diaries, even letters sent home mention how mountain passes were lined with the dead. Soldiers left behind became landmarks, stark reminders of the cost of moving forward. Guides pointed to corpses as mileposts. Turn after the man in the red cloak, they would say. The frozen horse marks the safer slope. It sounds grotesque, but in the endless sameness of the snow, a body could mean the difference between losing the trail and reaching safety. And then there are the stranger customs whispered among the soldiers. Some believed that stepping directly over a frozen corpse would curse your feet with frostbite. so men awkwardly detoured around them, bowing slightly as if in apology. Others placed small tokens, bits of bread, a button, a prayer bead, upon the chest of the fallen, an improvised offering to appease the mountain. Imagine an army weaving through a graveyard of their own comrades, transforming each frozen body into both a road sign and a shrine. The smell reaches you slowly, faint, yet sharp. Not the smell of decay, for the cold preserves too well, but something metallic, a tang of iron lingering in the air. It mingles with the smoke from nearby fires, an unsettling perfume that clings to your nostrils. You pull your cloak tighter, as if the fabric could somehow block the scent, though it lives more vividly in your memory than in the air. Modern researchers remain divided on how intentional these body markers truly were. Some suggest armies deliberately left the dead where they fell, knowing others would follow and need the guidance. Others argue it was a matter of necessity, not strategy. The men simply lacked the strength to bury their dead in the frozen ground. Either way, the frozen became part of the path itself, silent companions to those still breathing. You keep walking, but the images are everywhere now. A mule lying stiff on its side, its harness still strapped on. A hand protruding from a snowdrift like a root clawing for the sky. A helmet rim frosted white, perched atop a skull whose grin seems to mock the living. Each sight chips away at you until numbness is all you have left to offer. The column slows at a particularly narrow ledge. Heavy snow has obscured the trail. The guide hesitates, scanning the slope, then points to a dark lump half exposed near a rock. It's another corpse, this one kneeling as if in prayer, frozen in place. The guide gestures to it confidently. This is the correct way, his gesture implies. Without that marker, you realize the path would be mere guesswork, perhaps a path to death. Even in silence, the dead are leading you onward. At night, by the fire, men whisper about what they've seen. One insists he saw a frozen face smile as they passed. A trick of the light, perhaps, but enough to send a shiver down the line. Another swears the bodies are fewer when you look back, as if the mountain reclaims them when unobserved. Jokes arise, thin and bitter. At least the dead never complain about rations or blisters. But laughter dies quickly, suffocated by the thought that tomorrow you might be one of those roadside statues. Sleep is uneasy. When you close your eyes, you see the pale shapes again, their outlines glowing in the darkness of your memory. You dream of walking through an endless corridor of frozen figures, each one slowly turning its head to watch you pass. You wake with a start, the fire low, the night silent. For a moment, you're unsure whether you dreamed at all. Dawn arrives, pale and pitiless. You trudge on, following the line, and realize that the mountain keeps its own record of the march. Not on parchment, not in ink, but in frozen flesh. Long after songs fade and banners rot, the bodies will remain locked in ice until spring, or perhaps forever. They are both memory and warning, carved into the very path itself. You keep your eyes forward now, unwilling to linger on the shapes at the edge of your vision. Yet you know they are there, lining the road like silent sentinels. Each step brings you closer to the possibility that one day you, too, might stand frozen in eternal watch, guiding others through the past long after your voice has faded. The mountain seems empty, but you soon realize you are not alone. Ahead, a figure emerges from the mist, wrapped in a rough wool cloak, leaning on a shepherd's staff. He looks like any villager trudging home. But the soldiers stiffen, their hands tightening on their weapons. In terrain like this, strangers are never just strangers. They are guides, spies, or threats, and sometimes all three at once. Documents from medieval campaigns frequently mention locals encountered in high passes. Sometimes they offered help, leading armies through safe trails in exchange for coin or food. Other times they misled entire columns, steering soldiers into ambushes or dead ends. These encounters were a gamble, every bit as dangerous as avalanches or frostbite. You rely on someone who knows the mountains better than you, yet you can never be certain which banner his loyalty serves. And then there are the little eccentricities preserved in the side notes of chronicles. One tale describes spies disguising themselves as harmless shepherds, driving small flocks of goats ahead to appear innocent. Another tells of a woman who sold warm milk to freezing soldiers, then disappeared the next day. Rumors swirled that she had delivered information to the enemy along with her dairy. Picture it. Hardened men clutching mugs of milk, unknowingly funding their own downfall. You step closer now, studying the man in the snow. His beard is frosted, his eyes sharp despite the weather. He mutters in a dialect you barely understand, pointing toward a ridge. Is it safety or a trap? You glance at the commander, who weighs the choice quickly. The column cannot wander blindly, so the order is given to follow. Boots crunch into a new path, trust and fear braided together like rope. The smell of the stranger lingers as you walk behind him. Sheep, smoke, and unwashed wool, strangely comforting in the sterile cold. He moves with ease, stepping where the snow is shallowest, tapping his staff against hidden rocks. Men copy his every move, grateful yet wary. No one speaks too loudly, as if afraid he might overhear a thought. Modern historians remain divided on how often locals truly acted as guides versus deceivers. Some argue that practical survival made loyalty fluid. Villagers aided whoever paid best. Others insist that communities lean strongly toward defending their own territory, exploiting foreign armies with misinformation. The truth likely varied from valley to valley, day by day, with survival shaping allegiance more than politics. Hours pass, and the guide halts at a fork between two slopes. He gestures one way, mutters a word, then vanishes into the mist without waiting for thanks. The army is left staring at his footprints until the wind erases them. Suspicion prickles. Was he saving you or abandoning you to fate? Only the next mile will tell. The path grows narrower, cliffs yawning on either side. You can feel the fear ripple down the line, men glancing back at the space where the stranger vanished. Some mutter curses, others whisper prayers. You realize how fragile trust becomes when your life depends on a man you met only minutes ago. At camp that night, stories spread like sparks. One soldier swears the guide's cloak bore the colors of the enemy. Another insists he saw a silver coin change hands between him and the commander. The truth twists in the retelling until no one is sure whether they were saved or betrayed. You lie awake, staring at the smoke curling through the tent flap. The faces of shepherds, milk sellers, and shadowy locals flicker in your mind. They are ghosts of the past, appearing and vanishing, always holding your life in their hands. You wonder how many armies before yours walked into traps this way, and how many slipped through safely by trusting the right stranger. The wind rattles the canvas, and you close your eyes, uneasy. Tomorrow you will walk again, not knowing whether the next cloaked figure on the path is salvation, deception, or both at once. Morning comes, brittle and gray, and the column stirs with a sluggish reluctance. Men cough into their cloaks, boots creak against stiff snow, and somewhere in the mist, a priest clears his throat. You know what's coming because you've heard it every day since the march began. The slow unfurling of relics and banners. Chroniclers from that era record this ritual with almost as much reverence as they do battles before trudging into the white unknown. Soldiers gathered behind symbols of faith, splinters of the true cross, bones of obscure saints, banners stitched with holy images. These objects were not merely decoration. They were shields for the soul, assurances that divine favor accompanied the army step by step. Without them, morale withered as quickly as toes in the frost. And yet, woven among these solemn moments are stranger details. One source tells of a reliquary so heavy it required 2 men to drag it on a sledge, slowing the column, yet never abandoned. Another rumor insists that soldiers sometimes wore amulets fashioned from ground-up saints' bones mixed into wax, convinced it would warm their blood. Imagine shuffling up an icy slope, knees buckling, yet refusing to drop a box of finger bones because you believe it keeps death away. The priest lifts a hand, and the column halts. A small altar is improvised from a flat rock. The reliquary is placed atop it, a gleaming box studded with gems that catch the little light filtering through the storm. The sharp, resinous smell of incense fights against the odor of sweat and damp wool. Soldiers bow their heads, some muttering prayers, others simply closing their eyes to rest. Modern scholarship cannot quite agree on the role these relics truly played. Some historians argue they were central to discipline, binding men to a higher cause when rations and pay failed. Others suggest they were more symbolic, cherished by a few but largely ignored by weary soldiers. The evidence is scattered. Sometimes glowing descriptions of miracles, other times silence, as if the relics were mere baggage. What is certain is that commanders carried them, convinced or not, because abandoning them risked mutiny as much as blasphemy. The chanting begins. Low voices ripple down the line, blending with the hiss of falling snow. Latin words you barely understand echo in your ears, their rhythm steadying your breath. For a moment, the biting cold loosens its grip. You feel wrapped not just in wool but in invisible layers of belief, fragile, yet warming. When the ritual ends, the banners are raised. Painted saints flutter stiffly in the wind, their faces serene despite the storm. Soldiers straighten, shoulders squaring under the gaze of holy figures. You sense the change immediately. The column moves again, faster, steadier, as if the relics themselves have given strength. But faith cuts both ways. Later, by the fire, you hear whispers that today's avalanche was punishment for doubters. Others claim the relic gleamed brighter, proof that salvation is near. Belief shapes memory, turning the day's suffering into narrative. The mountain is no longer just snow and stone. It is a theater where saints and sinners wrestle in silence. The night grows heavy. In the camp, relics are placed in the center, guarded carefully. Men sleep in circles around them, as if the objects radiate warmth through the darkness. You notice one soldier pressing his lips to the reliquary before lying down, eyes closed in exhausted trust. Another keeps a tiny wooden cross tied to his wrist, clutching it even in sleep. You lie back, smoke curling above, and stare at the blurred outline of the reliquary box glowing faintly in the firelight. Is it protection or simply weight? Does it shield the army or drag it down? You cannot say, but you know this. Men need something to believe in when the mountain seems determined to bury them. Whether it is cloth, bone, or a whispered chant, faith is the one fire that cannot freeze. And so the relics march with you, silent but ever present, their jeweled eyes watching as you take another step into the white. The march drags on, and with every breath you draw, the air feels sharper, slicing your throat. Men cough around you, some spitting flecks of red into the snow. The cold has settled inside their lungs like an unwelcome tenant, refusing to leave. It isn't the sword or arrow that strikes first here. It's the slow ache of illness, the creeping fever that burns beneath layers of ice. Accounts from medieval armies mention this constant battle against sickness. Frost cracked lips until they bled. Damp wool invited sores, and lungs rattled with coughs that turned fatal in the thin air. Supplies ran thin, and the cold turned even mild ailments into serious threats. Commanders may have spoken of enemy walls and glory, but soldiers remembered the winter for what it really was. A campaign against their own bodies. And then you stumble across a peculiar note, tucked into the writings of a friar who accompanied one alpine march. He described men chewing bitter roots they dug from the frozen earth. Angelica, he claimed. A plant locals swore could ease coughing and warm the blood. Others gnawed on strips of pine bark, believing the resin carried strength from the trees themselves. Imagine rows of warriors, faces blackened with soot to protect their eyes, crouched over the snow like children hunting weeds, stuffing fibrous roots into their mouths because they had nothing else left to try. You kneel in the snow yourself, fingers numb as you scrape at the soil beneath a rock. The root you tug free is stringy, smelling faintly of pepper and earth. You bite down, and bitterness floods your tongue, so sharp it makes your eyes water. But warmth follows, real or imagined, and you keep chewing. Around you, others do the same, desperate to believe that nature has hidden medicine here in the frost. Scholars today debate just how effective these remedies might have been. Some suggest angelica and pine resin genuinely offered nutrients or mild antiseptic qualities. Others dismiss them as folklore, arguing the plants did little but distract men from their misery. The evidence is scattered in half-believed anecdotes, leaving modern minds to guess whether roots really saved lives or merely offered hope where hope was thin. The column trudges on, each man coughing, chewing, whispering prayers. The smell of roots mixes with smoke when they are boiled into thin stews at night, turning the camp into a strange apothecary. The flavor is harsh, almost medicinal, but men slurp it down gratefully, warming their hands around cups as if clutching treasure. You notice the small rituals that bloom in this grim setting. One soldier always chews 3 bites before swallowing, convinced it wards off fever. Another insists the roots must be gathered facing east, toward the rising sun, or they lose their power. These gestures cost nothing, but they bind the men together in a web of belief and routine, fragile shields against despair. At night, the coughing echoes through the tents, a chorus of rattling lungs that drowns out even the crackle of the fires. You lie awake, listening, counting breaths between the wheezes of the man beside you. The smell of damp wool, pine smoke, and bitter roots fills the air, heavy enough to press into your dreams. In those dreams, the mountain itself seems to breathe with you, exhaling frost, inhaling warmth, deciding who will wake in the morning. Morning comes anyway. Men rise slower, shoulders stooped, but still they rise. A pot of root stew simmers over the coals, sending up a thin ribbon of steam. You sip from it, grimacing at the taste, but grateful for the heat spreading through your chest. For a moment, the cough eases, the ache dulls, and you feel strong enough to take another step. The march continues. Each crunch of boots is now joined by the rustle of roots tucked into belts, the faint chewing as men march. The mountain offers no mercy, but you steal small remedies from its soil, bitter gifts that may or may not heal. Whether the plants truly work or not almost doesn't matter, because belief itself becomes medicine when survival depends on hope. And so you march, soot around your eyes, roots in your mouth, coughing into the wind. A strange army indeed, more herb gatherer than warrior, but still moving forward, still alive for now. You wake with your shoulders aching, not just from the weight of your pack, but from the prison you've been wearing all along. The moment you shift, you feel it. The plates of your armor, stiff and frozen, clinging to your body like an iron cage left out overnight. You tug at a strap, and it cracks, ice splintering along its length. You are supposed to be a soldier armed for battle, but today you feel like nothing more than a statue bound in chains. Written sources from medieval campaigns are clear on one thing. Armor was both lifeline and curse in the cold. Mail links, usually so flexible, stiffened when snow melted into the rings and refroze, locking them like rusted chains. Plate armor turned into a personal icebox, the metal drawing heat from the flesh until skin burned with frost. Knights who had once charged gloriously across battlefields found themselves hobbling, clumsy, fighting their own gear rather than the enemy. And yet, you catch sight of something oddly human in these records, too. One chronicler describes soldiers stuffing straw between layers of mail and padding, not just for warmth, but to keep the iron from sticking to their skin. Another mentions men urinating on their own breastplates to melt the ice before strapping in again, laughing bitterly at the smell, but glad for the regained movement. Imagine that. The proud knight reduced to such an indignity just to keep his armor wearable in the morning chill. You tug your cloak aside and glance at your own gauntlets. The leather beneath is stiff, the rivets crusted with frost. You slide your hand in and feel the bite immediately, as though plunging into snow. Each flex of your fingers is slow, delayed, like the hands of a puppet pulled by frozen strings. Around you, others slap their arms against their bodies, shaking limbs to bring life back into them. The sound of metal rattling against metal fills the morning like a grim percussion. Scholarly opinion on how effective armor truly was in such conditions remains divided. Some argue that it still offered essential protection, even against the elements, by blocking wind and shielding flesh. Others counter that it caused more deaths than it prevented. The biting cold proved more of a hindrance than the enemy, slowing the soldiers until they froze or collapsed from exhaustion. Scattered accounts offer glimpses of this brutal reality. One chronicler lauded the resilience of knights in their armor, while another lamented the numerous men who perished because their own breastplates transformed into icy tombs. The march resumed. Each step sent a groan through the armor, a scraping, grinding sound, the echoing cold a constant presence in my ears. I felt like a living bell, every movement ringing with the clang and clatter of metal. The weight felt doubled in the thin, frigid air. I envied the less fortunate soldiers in their patched wool. Their lighter, more flexible attire allowed for greater ease of movement, while I bore the burden of metal, a constant reminder of my supposed rank. Snow drifted into the gaps between my gorget and cloak beneath my helmet's rim, melting on contact, only to freeze again, a relentless cycle of discomfort. My breath fogged inside my visor, condensing into droplets that turned to ice, clinging to my lashes and beard. Raising the visor for air only brought the stinging whip of the wind to my face. There was no escape, only a choice between different forms of misery. At midday, the column halted near a cluster of rocks, and men used knives to pry at their frozen armor, chipping away the frost. One soldier held his helmet over a fire, rotating it like a cooking pot before cautiously replacing it on his head. Another violently shook his arms, muttering curses, before collapsing into the snow, too exhausted to continue. I watched him sink into stillness, his cuirass gleaming faintly under the pale sun, until others roughly dragged him back to his feet with shouts of encouragement. The smell of metal was sharp in my nostrils, mingling with the sense of smoke and sweat. I ran my tongue across my lips and tasted iron, as if the armor had seeped into my very being. This unsettling sensation made me wonder if the mountain was slowly transforming me into one of its statues, my flesh hardening into metal, my movement stilled until I became a part of its eternal silence. Yet, even amidst the misery, moments of dark humor surfaced. One soldier clanked so loudly that others joked he could scare away wolves simply by walking. Another slipped on the ice and landed flat on his back, unable to get up until two comrades righted him, like a capsized turtle. Even here, in the depths of suffering, laughter bubbled briefly, warming the group like an ember hidden in the snow. Night fell. With stiff fingers, I unbuckled my armor, each strap a battle in itself. The padding underneath was damp, sour with sweat, and reeked of mildew. I laid the pieces beside me, frost already forming on their edges. Putting them on in the morning would be a Herculean task, but I dared not leave them unguarded. Unguarded armor was both a curse and a necessity. Without it, the enemy's arrows would find me. With it, the cold might claim me first. I lay down, wrapping myself in a cloak that smelled of smoke and iron. The stars flickered faintly above, and I wondered if even they felt pity, witnessing soldiers frozen within their own armor. I drifted into a restless sleep, the ceaseless clinking of metal echoing in my dreams, as if the chains followed me even into rest. Tomorrow I would don it all again. Tomorrow, I would march once more, an unwilling statue trudging through the snow. The mountain would test my strength, but my armor would test it even more. And still, step by step, I would move forward because stopping meant becoming the very statue I already felt myself to be. The mountain road narrowed again, and the groan of wood preceded the sight of a broken wagon. Its wheels were frozen, stiff, the axle screaming in protest. The mule pulling it slipped on the ice, its eyes wide with terror, before collapsing into the snow. Men rushed forward, tugging at the ropes, heaving at the load, cursing under their breath. But the wagon remained stubbornly immobile. The mountain had claimed another victim, not a man this time, but the lumbering skeleton of supply. Historical accounts from this period repeatedly describe similar scenes. Wagons breaking under strain, animals succumbing to the elements, supplies tumbling into ravines. What use was meticulous inventory planning when every jolt of the road could shatter a wheel? Chroniclers noted that even robust carts faltered on the steep, icy passes. In the end, the army's lifeline of bread, arrows, tents, and tools was held hostage by a terrain more powerful than any commander. And then there were the strange details that clung to the memory. One diary entry tells of soldiers dismantling the broken wagons piece by piece for firewood, prioritizing warmth over cargo. Another mentions that when animals collapsed, their frozen carcasses were hacked apart for food, while their hides became makeshift coverings for men too poor to own cloaks. Imagine a wagon intended to deliver supplies ending up as fuel, and the animal that pulled it becoming both dinner and a blanket. A grotesque form of recycling, yet a testament to the ingenuity born of desperation. I watched as men unloaded sacks from the broken cart, piling them onto sledges that screeched against the ice. Every handful of grain was precious. None could be wasted. But the mule was a different matter. It lay on its side, its flanks heaving, its hooves trembling. A soldier knelt, stroking its muzzle, whispering words too soft for me to hear. Then, with grim efficiency, he drew a knife across its throat. The animal convulsed once, then stilled, steam curling into the frosty air. Silence descended, heavy and raw. The smell of blood spread quickly, metallic and warm against the sterile cold. Men exchanged glances, then looked at the carcass, and I saw the calculation in their eyes. By nightfall, the meat would be roasting over fires, stringy but sustaining. No one cheered, no one joked. They simply accepted what hunger demanded. Modern historians are divided on whether armies adequately prepared for such inevitabilities. Some argue that commanders fully anticipated losing wagons and animals, incorporating contingencies for butchering and repurposing them. Others believe these decisions were made only in the face of crisis, improvised by soldiers with no other options. The truth likely varied with each campaign, sometimes foreseen, often not, but always tragic. The march resumed, with fewer wagons and more sledges pulled by weary men. I felt the weight on my shoulders, the straps digging deeper. Without the beasts of burden, the load shifted to human backs. Every soldier became both fighter and mule, dragging the army inch by inch over stone and snow. The squealing of wheels was replaced by grunts, the dull slap of ropes against palms, the crunch of boots strained by extra loads. I stumbled, nearly dropping my pack, and caught myself against a rock. The cold bit harder with the added weight, sweat freezing against my skin. I glanced back and saw the line stretching behind me. Men bent double, ropes biting into their shoulders, faces grim. It looked less like an army and more like a chain gang, bound not by law, but by necessity. At camp that night, the broken wagon was remembered in silence. Fires sputtered with pieces of its wood, warming hands as smoke curled upward. Strips of mule meat hissed on spits, the smell greasy and pungent. I chewed slowly. The taste was tough, but oddly comforting. Hunger transformed even sorrow into sustenance. Around the fire, men shared quiet tales. One insisted he had seen ghosts lingering where the wagon had fallen, pale figures watching as the load was stripped away. Another swore the mule's bray would echo in his ears forever, louder than any horn. A third muttered that the mountain delighted in stealing wheels, preferring armies to crawl like insects rather than roll freely. The laughter that followed was thin, but it carried a kernel of defiance. I lay back, staring at the stars through gaps in the smoke. The image of the broken cart lingered with splintered, grain spilled, mule stilled. It felt like a symbol of the march itself. Heavy loads, sudden collapse, grim adaptation. Tomorrow, another wagon might fall. Another beast might be butchered. But tomorrow, I would still rise, shoulders bowed beneath what must be carried. And so the mountain taught its lesson, one wheel at a time. Nothing rolled forever here. Every step had to be earned with sweat, sacrifice, and loss. And yet, step by step, we moved on. The camp stirred uneasily, not from hunger this time, but from the sight of distant light. Far across the ridge, faint threads of smoke rose against the dusky sky, thin lines twisting upward from fires that were not our own. Men noticed first with curiosity, then with unease. Campfires always meant company, and in these mountains, company was rarely welcome. Accounts from the time emphasized this moment of tension. Soldiers often spotted distant plumes of smoke, never knowing whether they belonged to fellow travelers, local shepherds, or enemy scouts. Fires betrayed presence, warmth, giving away position as surely as banners in daylight. Commanders faced the same dilemma each time. Approach and risk ambush, or ignore and risk missing potential aid. Either choice carried a weight as heavy as ice. And yet, in the margins of chronicles you find stories that complicate this picture. One tale tells of two armies, sworn enemies, camping within sight of each other in the same valley. Too exhausted to fight, they simply tended their fires, glaring across the snow until morning. Then each continued their separate way. Another mentioned soldiers stumbling upon a mountain village feast where locals welcomed both sides in exchange for coin, their tables laden with bread and cheese as if war had never touched them. Smoke on a ridge could signal danger or supper. I stood at the edge of our camp, my cloak pulled tight against the cold, my eyes fixed on the distant glow. The wind carried faint scents with smoke, perhaps roasted meat, though it might have been my imagination conjuring comfort. Around me, men murmured in low voices, guessing who kindled those fires. Some gripped their weapons tighter, others crossed themselves, all watching the horizon as if it might answer back. Every pop of firewood suddenly sounded like a threat. Scholars today disagree about how armies interpreted these smoke signals. Some argue they were trained to interpret patterns, size, rhythm, number of fires, as coded messages indicating enemy presence. Others doubt this, suggesting it was guesswork dressed in hindsight. The truth is clouded by distance, as much for historians as it was for soldiers. The scouts returned at last, breathless, their eyes wide. Their report was short. Not an army, but a cluster of huts, locals huddled in the cold, their fires burning for survival. Relief washed through the camp, though suspicion lingered. Were they harmless peasants or allies of the enemy? The decision had to be made before dawn. That night, the firelight flickered on weary faces. Some men joked bitterly that if it were the enemy, at least a fight would warm their blood. Others muttered that locals might be worse, charging exorbitant prices for food or betraying the army for coin. The fires on the ridge burned steadily, indifferent to speculation, silent as stars. I slept uneasily, dreaming of flames spreading across the mountainside, smoke filling the sky until it blotted out the stars. When I awoke, the real plumes still curled faintly in the distance, waiting like a question unanswered. At dawn, the column moved cautiously toward the village. The snow crunched louder than usual, every step deliberate, weapons close at hand. As the huts came into view, the fires were revealed. Small, ordinary, the kind meant for cooking stew, not signaling armies. A handful of villagers emerged, wrapped in ragged wool, their eyes weary, but not hostile. Relief flooded the ranks, though pride kept men from showing it. That evening, our own campfires burned higher, warmer, brighter. The distant plumes faded as smoke mingled with smoke. One valley filled with the shared breath of survival. For a night, at least, enemy and friend blurred, replaced by the universal truth of mountains in winter. Fire meant life, and every living soul had to keep it burning. By the time the army reached the next valley, food was more valuable than gold. The march had consumed our supplies, and the broken wagons left behind had robbed us of what little cushion remained. Men gnawed on scraps of leather, their fingers trembling more from hunger than cold. So when the column stumbled across a scattering of huts tucked beneath the cliffs, every soldier's eyes lit up with desperate hope. Medieval records repeatedly emphasized the importance of local trade in winter marches. Armies rarely carried enough provisions to sustain themselves for long. Even the best-planned campaigns assumed they would buy, barter, or seize supplies from the communities in their path. Salt, bread, cheese, dried fish, whatever the peasants could spare, the soldiers demanded. In return, they might offer coin, protection, or threats thinly veiled as promises. Survival turned armies into uneasy merchants haggling in languages half understood. And yet, the little quirks in these encounters often linger more vividly than the contracts themselves. One account describes soldiers exchanging boots for shelter, literally giving away the very shoes on their feet in return for a night in a warm barn. Another mentions a commander who paid with salt rather than silver, because salt was more prized in the mountains than coin. Imagine offering a handful of crystals, gleaming like tiny jewels, and watching a peasant's eyes widen with gratitude. I stood now in the heart of the village, smoke curling from chimneys, the smell of stew drifting faintly. Peasants gathered wearily, clutching cloaks, their faces pale with both fear and hunger. They were no wealthier than we were. Their children peered from doorways, their eyes wide at the sight of frost-coated armored men. I quickly realized this was not a storehouse waiting to be plundered, but a fragile community on the edge of survival themselves. The negotiations began. Officers stepped forward, speaking through translators or gesturing with their hands. They offered coins, which the peasants eyed suspiciously. In lands where silver meant little and salt meant life, coin was less valuable than a bag of grain. Some villagers pointed toward the cliffs, where goats bleated faintly, offering milk in exchange for tools or cloth. Others shook their heads, unwilling to part with what little kept them alive. Historians remained divided about whether these exchanges leaned more toward cooperation or coercion. Some suggest armies respected local communities, knowing that goodwill meant reliable supplies. Others argue that soldiers often took what they needed, leaving villagers with nothing. The written sources are unreliable. Commanders preferred to describe generosity, while peasants left no records of their losses. The truth, as always, lies somewhere between charity and theft. I watched as a group of soldiers handed over a bundle of salt, receiving in return several rounds of hard cheese. The exchange looked almost ceremonial, salt grains glittering in the sunlight like coins of a different kind. Another pair of men bartered with a farmer for shelter in his barn, promising to guard his goats from wolves during the night. Trust grew not from contracts, but from desperation, sealed by mutual need. The air was filled with smells unfamiliar to my weary nose. Fresh milk steaming in clay pots, hay piled thick in barns, smoke from hearth fires mingling with the bitter tang of snow. For a brief while, I felt the ache in my stomach soften. A villager pressed a crust of bread into my hand, hard, small, but real. I chewed slowly, savoring every crumb, wondering if this moment of kindness would be remembered in their stories, or if tomorrow's hunger would erase it. Yet the encounter was not without tension. One soldier shouted angrily when refused more food. Another tried to slip into a barn without permission, only to be dragged out by his comrades. The line between trade and theft trembled as thin as ice. The commander intervened quickly, reminding the men that an army without allies in these mountains was already half defeated. Order was restored, but unease lingered in every glance. That night, the camp was warmer than it had been in days. Cheese and milk circulated. Fires burned with wood bought from the villagers, and a few lucky men slept on straw in barns instead of snow. Laughter rose tentatively, the first in weeks not forced through clenched teeth. The village watched from a distance, silent, their own fires glowing faintly. Two communities shared the same valley, bound together by necessity, separated by suspicion. As I lay back, full for the first time in days, I realized how survival in these passes was built not only on courage and faith, but on bargains struck in the cold. Salt traded for shelter, bread traded for coin, trust traded for time. Tomorrow the army would march on, leaving the villagers behind to face the mountain's indifference. But for this night, both soldier and peasant breathed easier, warmed by the fragile commerce of survival. The march wore on, and hunger was no longer the only emptiness gnawing at the men. There was another absence, quieter, but no less painful, the silence of home. For days, weeks, months, soldiers in these frozen mountains trudged forward without word from the families they had left behind. The letters they carried, if they carried any at all, rarely survived the snow. Messages vanished into storms, couriers lost in drifts, paper ruined by damp and frost. It was as though the mountains themselves swallowed voices, leaving soldiers to wonder whether anyone still thought of them beyond these ridges. Chroniclers hint at this void in passing. Campaign diaries mention letters dispatched but never answered, messages sealed in wax and handed to riders who never returned. One monk recorded that an army's correspondence was scattered like snow upon the wind, a poetic way of admitting that most words were never delivered. The official records rarely dwell on this ache, but between the lines you sense it, loneliness woven into every frozen step. And yet, within that silence, peculiar details emerge. Some soldiers, unable to send letters, carved names into their shields, or scratched initials onto tree trunks along the path, as if inscribing themselves into the land might bridge the distance. Others composed songs that mimicked letters, verses beginning with "My dearest," or "To the one I left," sung softly by campfires as though the mountain itself might carry the tune home. Picture weary men, their faces blackened with soot and frost, singing lullabies, not for comrades, but for wives and children hundreds of miles away. I sat by the fire, parchment in my lap, my quill trembling in frozen fingers. I wrote slowly, the ink thick and sluggish, words blotched where the nib stuck. I began with assurances, "I am alive," and ended with questions I knew would never be answered. Would they read these lines? Would the letter ever reach them? I tucked it away anyway, because the act of writing was its own comfort, a way of remembering that a world beyond the snow still existed. Scholarly opinion diverges on how effective medieval army communication systems were. Some argue they were surprisingly sophisticated, with relay riders and coded signals keeping commanders in touch across vast distances. Others counter that such systems collapsed in the mountains where weather and terrain shredded any line of contact. The truth lies buried in the few surviving letters. Fragments of longing, scraps of strategy, broken sentences that stop abruptly, as if the page itself froze mid-thought. In camp, men murmured about their families. One described a child he had left barely walking, now surely old enough to run. Another wondered whether his farm had survived the winter without him. A third admitted he could no longer remember his wife's face clearly, the edges blurred by snow and time. Each confession was half-whispered, because to speak too loudly of absence was to invite despair. I glanced upward. Smoke from our fire twisted into the sky, joining the clouds that drifted toward unseen valleys. For a moment, I imagined the smoke carrying my thoughts across ridges, down rivers, over fields, until it reached home like a ghostly letter. It was foolish, perhaps, but no more foolish than singing to absent children or carving names into bark. The mountain might devour paper and riders, but it could not silence memory. Night deepened. I unfolded my parchment once more, running my finger over the words. The ink had smudged, but the meaning remained. Proof that in this frozen wilderness, I still remembered warmth. Around me, men clutched scraps of parchment, lockets, carved tokens, whatever linked them to absent voices. Some kissed them before sleeping. Others hid them deep in their cloaks, as though afraid the wind might steal them away. And in the morning, the march resumed, the letters tucked close to the heart. Few would ever reach their destination, but the act of writing, of believing in a future audience, kept feet moving. The silence of home might stretch unbroken, but hope echoed louder than the snow. The snow grew thinner as we climbed, but the road didn't grow clearer. The path bent and twisted, often disappearing altogether beneath drifts or rocky slides. In daylight, we could sometimes follow footprints, wagon ruts, or the faint line of a trail carved by those who had passed before. But when storms swept in, those signs vanished. And when the sky darkened and the earth was swallowed by white, we found ourselves looking upward for guidance. Medieval accounts often mention how armies turned to the heavens when the land betrayed them. Navigating by the stars was not only for sailors at sea. Soldiers in mountain passes relied on constellations to anchor their direction when trails blurred. The North Star, steadfast and unblinking, became as important to an army as its commander. Without it, men risked circling endlessly, burning precious strength until the mountain claimed them. Yet, alongside the practical use of stars comes an almost mystical attachment. Some chronicles describe soldiers whispering that constellations shifted deliberately, tricking them, punishing them for arrogance. Others swore that Orion's belt pointed the way to safety, while the Pleiades warned of storms. Imagine men huddled on a ridge, staring at the same sky we know today, but believing each glittering was either friend or foe. I tilted my head back, my breath fogging into the night. The stars blazed brighter than I'd ever seen, unclouded by smoke or city light. They felt so close I could almost touch them, so sharp against the dark that they stung my eyes. I traced the patterns I knew. Ursa Major curving into the horizon, Cassiopeia sprawled like a crooked throne, the pole star steady in the north. For a moment, the world felt less chaotic, as if I were walking a map written across the heavens. But the mountain had its tricks. Clouds slid in quickly, smothering the sky until only a few stars flickered weakly. The men muttered uneasily, some crossing themselves, others swearing. Without the sky, direction felt suddenly fragile. The column slowed, every boot heavy with hesitation. Historians continue to debate just how skilled soldiers were in celestial navigation. Some argue they received training, at least rudimentary, enough to use major constellations. Others believe only a handful of guides or officers could read the stars, while most men followed blindly. The surviving evidence suggests both possibilities: orders that mention night marches guided by stars, and anecdotes of soldiers wandering hopelessly when skies turned dark. Around the campfire, stories emerged. One soldier claimed his grandfather had taught him to read the heavens like a book, each star a letter telling the path. Another insisted the stars were the souls of the dead, guiding those still alive. The debate grew lively, voices rising until laughter broke through. In the midst of hunger and frost, even arguing about stars becomes a comforting warmth. You lie back in the snow, cloaks spread beneath you, gazing upward. The stars will slowly, eternal and indifferent, yet you cling to them, finding solace in their presence, as if they were lifelines in this harsh landscape. You wonder if someone far away, perhaps on the other side of the world, is looking at the same constellations tonight, tracing the same familiar shapes in the night sky. The mere thought of shared observation across such vast distances is enough to bridge the gap, a silent, luminous message written across the heavens. Morning arrives, gray and overcast. The stars are gone, hidden behind a thick veil of clouds, but their comforting memory lingers, a quiet strength within. You rise, adjusting your pack, and continue forward along the indistinct trail. The path ahead remains uncertain, but the knowledge that a celestial map exists above, even if unseen, steadies your steps, providing a sense of direction and purpose. In these unforgiving mountains, the stars represent more than just celestial bodies. They are anchors of hope, tangible proof that beyond the snow and the oppressive silence, there is still a pattern, an order, a sense of permanence in a world that relentlessly seeks to erase you, to consume you entirely. The path takes a sharp turn, and suddenly you hear it. A hollow groan, the sound of stressed timber. Ahead lies a bridge, a fragile scar stretched across a gaping chasm. Its planks are covered in snow, its ropes stiff with frost, a perilous structure seemingly held together by little more than hope. You pause, your gaze fixed on this precarious construction, wondering how many men it has borne, how many it has claimed. The gorge yawns below, the wind whistling through the chasm, a constant reminder of the deadly fall that awaits a single misstep. Written accounts from past winter campaigns describe these crossings with a mixture of chilling dread and awestruck reverence. Soldiers' journals recount how the bridges swayed violently in storms, how ice clung to the ropes until they were as rigid and unforgiving as iron. Each step, they wrote, felt like a gamble with fate itself. For an army burdened with supplies and animals, these crossings were nothing short of nightmares, yet they were unavoidable. Without bridges, entire campaigns would grind to a halt at the edge of cliffs, defeated not by enemy forces, but by the sheer emptiness of the air. And then, tucked away in the margins of these historical chronicles, you find oddities that linger in the mind, haunting details that amplify the stark reality of the situation. One account describes soldiers crawling across on all fours, too consumed by fear to stand upright, their armor clinking like the frantic movements of frightened beetles. Another mentions men blindfolding themselves before venturing onto the bridge, convinced that the sight of the abyss would break them more swiftly than the fall itself. Imagine an army of hardened warriors, their eyes covered like children playing a fearful game, shuffling inch by inch across a creaking span, each step a testament to their courage, their fear, and their unwavering determination. You step onto the planks now. They creak instantly under your weight, the sound of snow crunching under your boots hollow and thin, the ropes humming in the wind, vibrating like the strings of a harp. You grip them tightly, your fingers numb inside your stiff gloves, forcing yourself forward. Each sway of the bridge sends a jolt through your stomach. Each groan of the timber echoes in your chest. The scent of resin hangs heavy in the air, mingling with the cold stone and the metallic tang of fear, a palpable, almost suffocating presence. The column moves slowly, one man at a time, a deliberate distance maintained between each soldier to lighten the load. A mule at the head of the line brays in panic, its eyes rolling, its body trembling. Soldiers tug at its ropes, shouting encouragement and curses in a desperate attempt to coax it forward. Each hoof thud is loud, each pause stretches time thin, taut as the ropes themselves. The bridge sways more violently, the ropes creak louder, and you can feel the collective breath of the entire column held tight, suspended in a moment of shared vulnerability and fear. Academic debate continues to rage concerning the origins of these medieval bridges. Some historians argue that army engineers constructed temporary crossings, lashing timbers and ropes together. Others suggest that the armies relied more on existing village spans, crude structures never intended to support the weight of thousands of feet. The historical record is muddled, fragmented, offering only glimpses of the passage through the gorge, leaving us to imagine the details filled with creaks, groans, and fervent prayers. Halfway across, a violent gust of wind tears down the gorge, ripping through cloaks and helmets. The bridge lurches violently to the side, the ropes shuddering under the strain. You cling desperately, your chest pressed against the icy rope, your breath ragged and shallow. A soldier ahead slips, his boot skidding on the ice. He crashes to his knees, his arms flailing wildly, and for a heart-stopping moment, the entire column gasps in unison. Two men grab him, hauling him back to his feet, dragging him onward. The bridge holds, but the fear remains, lingering like a persistent shadow. At last, your boots touch solid ground again. You stumble onto the far side, your knees weak, your hands raw from gripping the ropes. Behind you, the line continues its slow, precarious shuffle, figures swaying like leaves on a string. Relief washes over you, slowly, like thawing fingers, fragile, fleeting, but undeniably real. That night, the campfires burn brighter than usual. Men laugh louder, their voices breaking with the release of tension. Stories fly around the fires about who slipped, who cursed, who kissed the planks in relief. Some joke that they would rather face an enemy's blade than another such bridge. The laughter is jagged, nervous, yet it warms the night as surely as the flames. You lie back, staring upward, still feeling the sway of the bridge deep within your bones. The memory will not fade easily. The creak of timber, the groan of ropes, the gaping abyss yawning below. You realize that the mountain fights not only with snow and storm, but with emptiness itself, daring you to cross where no ground exists. Tomorrow the path will continue, another ridge, another trial. But tonight you rest alive. The chasm is behind you, the bridge still holds. The wind is relentless, tearing through cloaks, battering tents, howling like some great beast that refuses to sleep. In such chaos, commands shouted by officers are lost instantly. A soldier 3 paces away hears nothing but the storm's fury. Yet the column must move. And in the mountains, where a line can stretch for miles, some method of maintaining cohesion must exist. That method comes not from words, but from a more primal sound, the steady beat of drums. Accounts from various campaigns describe how rhythm became the very skeleton of an army on the march. Drums carried farther than voices, even against the roar of blizzards or the echoes of valleys. One source from a Burgundian expedition claims that the drummers' hands never ceased their rhythmic beating, even when frostbitten, because silence meant collapse, the dissolution of the very fabric of the army. Another mentions horns used in tandem, but it was the drums, the heartbeat of wood and hide, that gave shape to the soldiers' footsteps, that infused their movement with purpose. And then, of course, come the curious details that add texture to this story of survival. Chroniclers sometimes wrote of drummers stuffing straw or wool inside the shells of their instruments to prevent the skins from splitting in the cold. One story tells of men warming drumheads over fires each morning, risking cracks and burns just to ensure that the drums would not sag in the damp air. Imagine the absurd sight. Half-frozen soldiers huddled around a fire, not to warm themselves, but to keep their instruments alive, their very means of maintaining order and morale. You hear them now. Boom, boom. Slow, steady, deliberate. The sound cuts through the wind, each strike guiding boots forward. Men fall into step instinctively, their strides syncing with the rhythm. You feel your own heartbeat begin to match the drum's steady pulse. Your body carried along by its unwavering rhythm. The snow still drags at your ankles, the cold still bites your face, but the beat dulls the misery, providing a sense of continuity and purpose in the face of overwhelming adversity. It is a tether in the storm, a rope of sound binding you to the line, connecting you to your fellow soldiers and providing a sense of shared purpose and determination. The scholars who examine such practices often disagree about the extent to which drums actually enforce discipline. Some argue that they brilliantly maintained order, preventing chaos even in near-blind conditions. Others believe that they offered more comfort than control, giving men something familiar to cling to when the world became white and endless. What both sides acknowledge is the sheer psychological weight of rhythm. Even unwilling feet can be tricked into marching by a drum's insistent beat. The path winds downward briefly, and the snow muffles the echoes, making the drumbeats sound closer, almost intimate. You catch sight of the drummer ahead, a boy no older than 16. His cheeks hollow, his hands raw, striking with a focus that seems more trance than strength. His drumhead shivers with each strike, yet he never misses a beat. Soldiers glance at him as they pass, nodding slightly, as if he alone holds the column together, as if his rhythm is the very lifeblood of their collective journey. At night, the drums do not fall silent. They are struck softer at intervals to mark the passage of time within the camp. Each beat reminds the men of order, of routine, of something stable in the shifting chaos of the snow. You drift to sleep hearing it, low, steady, almost like a lullaby, but not all find comfort in its rhythm. One soldier mutters that the drums echo too loudly, carrying too far, revealing the camp's location to potential enemies. Another insists that the rhythm wakes the spirits of the mountains, that each boom is an insult demanding vengeance. Fear and faith twist around the sound, yet the drums continue, for without them, the line dissolves, the shared purpose dissipates, leaving only chaos and isolation. You wake before dawn, frost clinging to your lashes, and there it is again, boom, boom, boom. It rolls through the valley like the pulse of the earth itself. You rise, your shoulders aching, your feet blistered, and fall into step. Your body remembers the rhythm before your mind does, a testament to the drum's powerful influence. The march stretches endlessly, but the beat persists. It drowns out hunger, it masks pain, it binds you to those ahead and behind. You may forget the faces of the men beside you, but you will not forget the drumbeat. It is the sound of survival, the sound that carries you through mountains determined to scatter you into silence. And so you walk, boots crunching in time, breath pluming with each strike, the storm still raging, but no longer master. The drums own you now, and strangely, you are grateful for their unwavering rhythm, their relentless pulse that keeps you moving forward. The farther you march, the more you notice how men lean not only on food, fire, and rhythm, but also on belief in omens, in charms, in anything that suggests the mountain has rules rather than random cruelty. When survival feels like a coin toss, people begin to search for patterns in every gust of wind, every flicker of light. Chroniclers make frequent note of such practices. Soldiers tied charms to their belts, wore saints' medals around their necks, or carried small relics hidden in pouches. Yet, beyond official religion, the march was filled with quieter, stranger rituals. Some men refused to step first onto a frozen river, waiting until a comrade tested the ice. Others spat into the snow before lying down, convinced it appeased spirits dwelling beneath. These were not written in handbooks or orders. They were whispered traditions passed from one cold body to another, a silent testament to the shared belief in the supernatural powers that might influence their fate. And then there are the more peculiar accounts that linger in the memory. One tale speaks of soldiers refusing to eat white food, milk, cheese, even pale bread, during storms, fearing it would invite the snow to follow them inside. Another mentions men carrying raven feathers plucked from birds seen circling the peaks, believed to guard against avalanches. Picture an army trudging along, half-starved, cloaks ragged, yet carefully clutching a black feather as though it were armor, a symbol of protection against the unforgiving elements and the unpredictable whims of the mountains. You see it now all around you. A soldier presses a tiny wooden charm to his lips before every climb. Another murmurs the same phrase under his breath at every mile marker, too low for others to hear. A group pauses to knot strips of cloth on a branch at a crossroads, tokens fluttering in the wind like ghostly banners. None of these actions delay the march, yet each seems vital, as though neglecting them would be an invitation for disaster. Modern scholars argue over how seriously to take these superstitions. Some insist that they were central to maintaining morale in ways commanders could not. Others dismiss them as background noise, embellishments in chronicles meant to color otherwise bleak narratives. The surviving evidence, though, suggests belief was no trivial matter. Men froze, starved, and died, but they also carried charms, whispered prayers, and avoided unlucky numbers of steps. The line between faith and fear blurred until both became the same, indistinguishable in the face of overwhelming hardship. The mountain itself seems to respond. The wind rises suddenly, sending a howl through the valley that makes men cross themselves in unison. A raven passes overhead, its wings stark against the snow, and soldiers pause to watch, each interpreting the sight differently. Good luck, bad luck, or merely a reminder that life still moves freely above while they trudge below. You realize how fragile rational thought becomes when every step could end in silence. At night, around the fires, stories spread. One soldier swears he saw a figure in white walking alongside the column, vanishing whenever he turned his head. Another insists that the mountain takes men one by one until paid in full, and that charms only delay the debt. The laughter that follows is nervous, too sharp, but it binds the group together. Even fear can be a source of communal warmth, a shared experience that connects them in the face of their shared vulnerability. You lie awake, your cloak pulled tight, listening to the whispers. You glance at your own hand, where a strip of cloth is tied around your wrist, a charm you had dismissed at first, but now find yourself unwilling to remove. It is frayed, damp, useless in any practical sense, yet you keep it because in the mountains, when breath freezes in your throat and stars vanish behind clouds, sometimes the smallest scrap of superstition feels stronger than iron, providing a sense of hope and resilience in the face of the overwhelming power of nature. The dawn comes pale and unforgiving. Men rise slowly, each touching charms, muttering words, following rituals that seem foolish in daylight but essential to maintaining their morale and sense of purpose. The march resumes, steps falling into rhythm with the drums, eyes darting to sky and slope alike, searching for signs, for any indication that might offer a glimmer of hope in the face of the seemingly endless expanse of snow and ice. You know the mountain is indifferent. You know charms do not alter the snow. But you also know that belief is warmth, and warmth is survival. And so you walk, half-armored by faith, half by superstition, sanctified by the need to believe that the mountain has rules that can be bargained with. Whether or not that's true, the act of believing is enough to keep your legs moving through the endless white. The line crawls upward again, boots crunching into snow that seems to stretch without end. Men bend forward under the weight of their packs, their faces hollow, their eyes fixed only on the patch of ground before them. They would falter, perhaps even collapse, if not for the voice that rises above the storm. The commander rides near the front, his cloak snapping in the wind, his words carrying down the column like sparks in darkness. He promises what every soldier longs to hear, that beyond the pass lies warmth, food, and triumph. Contemporary records reveal how essential such proclamations were. Leaders understood that cold, hunger, and exhaustion sapped strength faster than any enemy blade. So they fed their armies hope. Charlemagne, Hannibal, and countless nameless captains spoke of victories waiting just beyond the ridge, treasures in the valleys below, or enemies trembling at their approach. Chroniclers often note these speeches with reverence, as though words alone lifted men over mountains. But buried in the margins of those same accounts are details less grand. One scribe writes of a commander promising not victory, but wine, insisting that barrels waited in the next village. Another recalls officers telling tales of warm baths and soft beds, fabrications spun to keep legs moving, to maintain the morale of the men and sustain their dwindling hope. Imagine an army dragging itself upward, not dreaming of glory, but of simple comforts. A loaf of bread still steaming, a roof that does not leak. The grand banners of conquest shrank into whispers of survival, the focus shifting from the abstract goal of victory to the immediate need for comfort and respite. You hear the voice now. It is hoarse, cracked from days of shouting, but still it cuts through the wind. The commander paints visions with each breath. Green valleys filled with orchards, towns with market stalls heavy with bread, villages where fires burn bright and bellies are full. He swears you are close, that one more ridge will reveal it. And though you know mountains stretch on endlessly, part of you clings to the picture. It is a story worth walking for, a source of hope that sustains them in their arduous journey. Historians remain divided on how effective such speeches truly were. Some argue that they were indispensable, the only glue that kept armies intact in conditions so brutal. Others believe soldiers rolled their eyes behind lowered brows, trudging not from belief but from fear of punishment. Both views carry truth. Some men surely marched on dreams of victory. Others marched because halting meant death. But all marched, and perhaps that was all commanders required. The column stirs with murmurs. A soldier near you mutters that he will drink a river dry once the valley comes. Another swears he can already smell bread baking. A third, more cynical, chuckles bitterly, claiming the only thing beyond the pass is another mountain. Yet even he continues, his step steady. Doubt may cool the heart, but it cannot freeze legs already moving. The wind whips harder, tearing at cloaks, yet the promise lingers. You imagine valleys full of smoke from chimneys, orchards glittering with frost but heavy with apples, taverns echoing with laughter. The picture feels absurd here among cliffs and silence. Yet it is enough. For a moment, your hunger dulls, your boots feel lighter, your breath comes easier. At camp that night, the commander walks the fires, repeating his assurances. He bends to speak with men individually, clapping shoulders, swearing that glory lies just beyond tomorrow. You watch faces lift slightly, shadows of smiles flicker. Even those who doubt take comfort in the ritual. Hope, even false hope, warms more than any cloak. You lie back, staring at smoke curling into the night sky. The stars are faint, hidden by drifting clouds, but the commander's words still echo. Perhaps tomorrow you will find valleys filled with orchards, or perhaps only more snow. It does not matter. The promise itself has kept you alive one more day. And in these mountains, that is victory enough. The mountain has been patient, but patience has its price. You sense it in the sag of men's shoulders, the hollow stare in their eyes, the way boots drag instead of lifting. Each ridge conquered leaves fewer bodies to press forward. Some fall to storms, others to hunger, others simply lie down and never rise. The army begins to resemble a river that grows thinner with every mile, spilling lives into the snow as naturally as water seeps into cracks. Sources from the period do not gloss over this toll. Chroniclers list casualties as though tallying coins, noting how many perished from cold before a single arrow was loosed. Monks writing far from the passes describe the mountain taking its tithe, a grim acknowledgement that every winter march was paid in flesh. Leaders could plan rations, routes, and banners, but they could not bargain with the peaks. The cold collected its due relentlessly, an unstoppable force that claimed lives with chilling indifference. Among those records, however, lurk smaller, stranger images. One account describes men building cairns of stones over frozen bodies, not to bury them, but to keep wolves from gnawing the flesh. Another notes soldiers marking the snow with crosses of ash, as if staking claims against the mountain itself. A third mentions comrades whispering the names of the fallen into the wind, convinced the gusts would carry them home. These details feel more human than the tallies. Grief expressed in gestures fragile as breath. You see it now all around you. A soldier stumbles, falls, and this time does not rise. His comrades pause, then press on. One man kneels briefly, placing a scrap of cloth over the still face before moving on. The line cannot stop long, not for a single man. Each life is honored in seconds, then abandoned for the sake of the living. The snow swallows the body quickly, erasing footsteps as if he never walked there at all. A stark reminder of the unforgiving nature of the mountain and the relentless march of time. Historians continue to wrestle with numbers. Some argue casualties from winter marches were exaggerated, inflated by scribes eager to magnify suffering. Others counter that records downplay losses, commanders unwilling to admit how many they sacrificed to ambition. The truth likely lies somewhere between. Not every story is accurate, but neither is every silence. What remains certain is that the mountain claimed lives freely and armies paid the price. A heavy toll exacted for their daring attempt to conquer the unforgiving landscape. You trudge forward, haunted by the sounds. The crunch of boots is often interrupted by a softer noise, the thud of a body hitting snow. It is quiet, almost polite, a sound too small for the enormity it represents. Each time, men flinch, glance, then move on. The rhythm of the march does not pause, a relentless pulse that continues despite the constant losses. At night, the camp grows emptier. Fires burn smaller, the circles around them thinner. The laughter that once flickered now fades almost completely, replaced by silence broken only by coughs and the snap of wood. You sit close to the flames, watching shadows stretch across faces gaunt and unfamiliar. Hunger and frost carve men into strangers long before death claims them, erasing their identities as their bodies weaken and succumb to the elements. Yet even here, gestures of remembrance persist. One soldier produces a scrap of parchment, writing down the names of those lost that day, though the ink freezes and smears. Another recites prayers aloud, his voice cracking but steady, each name given back to the night. These acts do not bring men back, but they assert something stubborn, that lives will not vanish without trace, even if only in whispers. The smell of the camp shifts too. Once heavy with smoke and leather, now it carries hints of decay where bodies lie unburied just beyond the circle of firelight. The cold preserves them, but still, the air feels touched by death, a palpable reminder of the losses sustained during their long and perilous journey. You pull your cloak tighter, but no fabric shields against that scent, that pervasive sense of mortality that permeates the air. You lie awake, staring at the stars through gaps in the clouds. For each one that flickers, you think of a man left behind that day, his story now only a footnote in chronicles unwritten. You wonder how many more will join him before the valley comes. The mountain has taken its tithe, and you know it will demand more before releasing the army. Yet still you rise at dawn. Still you walk, because even as men fall, the line must move, one boot after another, dragging memory forward through the snow. The ridge dips at last, and for the first time in weeks the air tastes different. It is still cold, still sharp, but beneath it lies another note. Smoke not from your own campfires, but drifting up from valleys ahead. You pause, nostrils flaring, and catch the faintest trace of something else. Wood burning clean, maybe even food cooking somewhere far below. The promise of life presses against your senses like a tide, stirring men from their stupor, reawakening their hope and invigorating them for the final leg of their journey. Medieval chronicles occasionally pause at these moments of relief. Writers describe the sudden burst of energy that swept through armies when they glimpsed green slopes after endless white. One monk likened it to souls thawing, as if bodies frozen in despair melted at the first sign of valleys. Another, more bluntly, wrote that the smell of hearth smoke gave men legs like deer, pushing them forward faster than any drum. But along with the joy came peculiar little details. A surviving letter describes soldiers stumbling into villages so eager for food that they burned their tongues on bowls of stew, laughing through the pain. Another tells of men kissing the ground of valley fields, ignoring the mud that smeared their faces. Imagine hardened warriors, cloaks ragged, armor dented, kneeling on the ground in gratitude to the earth. Their relief so profound that it overshadows their dignity and pride. These were not gestures of ceremony, but of raw survival, primal expressions of relief and gratitude. You see it now in the men around you. Shoulders straighten, steps quicken, even eyes brighten as plumes of smoke rise in the distance. Someone swears he hears church bells carried faintly on the wind. Another insists he smells bread, though it is surely imagination. Hope reshapes bodies as much as food ever could, a powerful force that renews their strength and determination. Yet historians caution that valleys were not always salvation. Some argue that emerging from the pass often meant stumbling straight into danger. Ambushes waiting in fertile ground, villages unwilling or unable to share supplies. Others remind us that armies sometimes reached valleys only to find them barren, stripped by earlier forces or ruined by winter. Relief was not guaranteed. It was a gamble, a precarious hope that might or might not be realized. Still, the psychological weight of reaching lower ground was immense, a turning point that shifted the balance of their survival. The descent begins and you feel the change immediately. The snow thins, replaced by patches of brown earth, damp and fragrant after weeks of sterile white. Meltwater trickles down rocks, the sound delicate as music. The air feels heavier, rich with scents you had almost forgotten. The earthy smell of the soil, the subtle fragrance of vegetation, a stark contrast to the sterile, icy landscape they had endured for so long. Nearly forgotten now, the memory flickers. Pine needles, damp earth, the smoke from unseen fires. Each downward step felt like a return to life itself. The column's pace quickened. Soldiers who had shuffled sluggishly a short time ago now strode with renewed purpose, muttering amongst themselves, even daring to laugh, a sound almost foreign to their ears. Their packs still weighed heavily, their armor still clinked, but the crushing weight of despair had noticeably lessened. Jokes, half fantastical, half promise, rippled through the ranks. Jokes about ale waiting in taverns, about welcoming women by warm hearths, about beds that wouldn't collapse beneath the weight of snow. Reaching a clearing, the view opened before them, revealing a valley speckled with cozy cottages, thin wisps of smoke ascending into the pale sky. Fields, dormant beneath a layer of frost, still held the promise of cultivation, flat and workable, undeniably human. A murmur, half sigh, half prayer, rippled down the line of weary men. Some made the sign of the cross, others simply stared, as though witnessing the earth for the very first time. By nightfall, the army had established camp at the valley's edge. Fires blazed brighter, fueled by readily available wood. Flames danced higher, casting a warm glow on the faces of the men. The scent of wood smoke permeated the air, mingling with the sounds of laughter, coughing, and the faint, fragile whisper of relief. The taste of relief was present in their stew, still thin, yet subtly flavored with foraged roots and herbs. It wasn't abundance, but it was no longer starvation. Lying back, gazing at a sky that seemed less hostile, less menacing than the unforgiving peaks they had just traversed, they saw stars twinkling above the valley's protective embrace. The mountains loomed behind them, silent and vast, yet for the first time, they felt like something conquered, not just endured. Tomorrow might bring new challenges, new enemies, renewed hunger, but tonight, the valley's smoke drifted above them like a blessing, a fragile reassurance that the world hadn't ended beyond the snow. They drifted towards sleep, bodies lighter, lungs fuller. The journey wasn't over, but the worst of the mountains lay behind them. Ahead lay fertile soil, warming fires, and the life-giving scent of spring's return. The valley welcomed them with a silence deeper than any blizzard. Snow still clung to the distant ridges, but the air felt different, less hostile, carrying the subtle fragrance of earth and woods. pausing at the boundary where rock and snow gave way to frozen fields. For the first time in weeks, they sensed the mountain's grip begin to loosen. The line of soldiers behind them stumbled into the open, their cloaks ragged, boots torn, faces gaunt and hollow. This wasn't triumph, they realized. It was survival, fragile and incomplete. Medieval accounts often depict such arrivals in understated tones. Armies emerging from winter passes rarely resembled victors. They appeared as survivors, diminished in number, gaunt and weary, dragging broken sledges behind them. Chroniclers meticulously recorded the commanders' reports of successful crossings. Yet the true story resided in the silences between the lines, men buried along the ridges, wagons splintered in ravines, animals frozen stiff in the snow. The mountains had granted passage, yes, but only after exacting a heavy toll. And then there are the more enigmatic echoes of memory. Some soldiers, once safe in the valley, carved symbols into trees or rocks, as if to permanently mark their survival. Others collected stones from the mountain pass, carrying them as talismans long after their arduous march had concluded. One account tells of knights who refused to remove their soot-covered masks even after reaching safety, fearing the mountain's glare might blind them again if they dared. Habits born of hardship clung tenaciously long after the immediate danger had receded. Walking through the valley, their boots sinking into the soft earth, softened by the thaw, the smell of wood smoke grew stronger, no longer a figment of their imagination, but a tangible reality. Cottages stood ahead, fires burning brightly, life continuing its steady rhythm. Villagers watched cautiously as the army limped past, their eyes widening at the sight of men who seemed more ghost than flesh. Children whispered, pointing at cloaks stiff with frost, at faces darkened by soot, at armor dulled by ice. To them, the soldiers were not heroes, but wanderers returned from another world entirely. Modern historians debate the strategic significance of these crossings. Some argue they were decisive, showcasing the resilience of armies capable of outlasting even the harshest of natural forces. Others view them as acts of folly, costly gambles that depleted strength before battles had even begun. The historical records rarely offer definitive answers. They leave behind only fragments, names of commanders, tallies of losses, and the occasional vivid description of snow, smoke, and the profound silence of the mountains. What is certain is this: every such march left scars far deeper than any ink could ever depict. That night at camp, the fires burned warmer, the food felt heavier and more satisfying in their bellies. Bread was soft again, ale a liquid, not a frozen slush. The men laughed, not loudly, not fully, but enough to sound truly alive. Rough, uneven songs drifted upward, yet carried with them notes of profound gratitude. Sitting by the flames, cloaks wrapped tight, they let the warmth seep into bones they had thought permanently frozen. The smoke curled into the night, blending with the light of the stars. Even in this relief, the images lingered, refusing to be forgotten. The mule collapsing beside a broken wagon, the avalanche that had erased comrades in mere seconds, the faces of frozen men, left as chilling markers along the path. The mountain was behind them, yes, but it was also within them now, carved into their memories as indelibly as frost into stone. They knew that years from now, long after battles were fought and won or lost, they would still dream of that white silence and the soft creak of snow beneath their boots. They stretched out by the fire, their eyes heavy with exhaustion. Men snored softly, their cloaks rising and falling with the steady rhythm of their breath. The night was calm, the valley protective, the mountain distant. Closing their eyes, they let the warmth cradle them, knowing that tomorrow the march would continue, along different roads. But tonight, at least, they rested. And so, as their breathing slowed and the intensity of their experiences softened, let the images fade gently. Picture the valley smoke rising into the pale sky, curling above fields where the snow slowly melts, drifting higher until it disappears among the stars. Imagine the soldiers, once bent and broken, now lying by the fires, their bodies heavy with exhaustion, but finally at ease. They are not triumphant, not yet, but they are alive, and that in itself is a victory of immense proportion. You feel the rhythm of their march still lingering, a faint drumbeat in the distance, steady and slow, matching their heartbeats, calming them, transforming each thud into a reassuring affirmation of life. The mountains remain vast and indifferent, yet for now, they are behind them. What lies ahead is uncertain, but no longer feels as cruel. They are moving forward, step by step, toward valleys where warmth waits. Let your body sink like snow settling after a storm. Let the sounds around you quiet, the cold soften into comfort. Whatever battles linger in your mind, set them down by the fire. Breathe deeply, slowly, and let the weight of the mountain lift from your shoulders. Sleep now, carried on the memory of survival. The path is long, but for tonight you are safe. The stars shine steady overhead, and the valley holds you in its silent, protective embrace. Sweet dreams.